Chapter 527 The Tracking Disc's Hidden Feature. In Tan Sheng's hands rested the enigmatic tracking disc, his chilly gaze upon the compass's trembling needle like ice. He would not have deigned to share any of his spoils with others if he had the choice. But the current circumstances allowed him no free room to choose as he liked. With their numbers confined to a mere trio, cornering the elusive Lu Yi was as hard as catching a mirage with bare hands. The day had seen them tirelessly tread the same path to and fro, a dozen times over, yet with no signs of Lu Yi in sight. If this were to go on and the Colosseum closed, Lu Yi would surely be able to fade away and escape. Half is better than nothing. He sighed with tremendous regret, deciding at last to just embrace the bitter consolation of what little gain remained. The resolve crystallized within him, unwavering and definitive. He raised his hand and bit down upon his fingertip. In elegant strokes he inscribed the name Lu Yi upon its surface not once but twice, as if invoking some arcane ritual of old. The scarlet fluid seeped into the heart of the disc, its presence ephemeral as it vanished without a trace. And then, as if struck by some unseen force, the tracking disc splintered into a myriad of iridescent shards, bursting forth in a glorious crescendo of rainbow hues, soaring into the heavens and fading from sight in the blink of an eye. Tracking discs possessed two divergent faculties. One was the accurate tracking of one's location through the compass's needle, as was used by Jianghu earlier, so long as both existed within the same plane of existence. The other, or more hidden feature of the tracking disc, which Tan Sheng now wielded, was what caused the disc to shatter and would therefore render it useless in the future. Yet this ability would completely divulge Lu Ye's position with no way at all to hide himself. The first ability required only the quarry's name to be written in blood. But the second method demanded 3 repetitions of the name, prompting Tan Sheng to write Lu Ye's name twice more. Meanwhile, seated calmly within the circle of his teleportation ward more than 800 miles away from Tan Sheng and his companions, Lu Yi felt an inexplicable shiver running down his spine. Before he could fathom what just happened, a streak of blood-red light descended from the heavens, enveloping him in its macabre glow. In an instant, the crimson radiance soared towards the sky, manifesting as a pillar of eerie arterial red. This bore a striking resemblance to the majestic eruption of light by the unique types of gold amulet. But the unique gold amulet emitted a golden column of light, while what he was engulfed in was a red streak of light lancing up into the sky, plus a relatively smaller burst of spiritual power. Lu Yi did not know what on earth just happened. But he knew this: a disturbance of such a grand scale would undoubtedly draw the attention of all nearby cultivators. Not wanting to be discovered, he immediately activated his teleportation ward and vanished from the spot. His caution was not misplaced. Moments after his departure, a group of cultivators arrived and entered the cavern. Yet, before they could investigate anything, one of them inadvertently triggered the explosive wards that Lu Yi had left behind. The entire cave groaned and trembled before being swallowed in a blaze of flames. The cultivators later emerged from the cave, their faces smudged with soot and dirt. More cultivators converged upon the scene, with one individual towering menacingly above the rest in midair, exuding the formidable aura of an elite Ninth Order. He silently surveyed the situation below before transmitting a message. The information swiftly reached Tan Sheng 800 miles away, prompting him to take flight immediately. In the blink of an eye, he transformed into a stream of light and vanished from view. Leaving behind Jianghu and his brother, their expressions filled with resignation. Jianghu had been reluctant to relinquish his control of the tracking disc, insisting on using it himself, precisely to prevent such a predicament. Alas, in the end, his deepest concern had materialized nevertheless. With the tracking disc no longer in their possession, Tan Sheng could naturally care less about the fates of the Jiang brothers. A Ninth Order like him could travel much faster and with greater mobility and convenience without 2 Fifth Orders slowing him down. While Tan Sheng appeared to be unlikely to renege on the deal to give them 2/10 of his share of the rewards, that could only be fulfilled if the 2 brothers remained alive by the time the dust settled. Thankfully, a considerable amount of time had elapsed since then, and the Ninth Order enemy, the Grand Sky Coalition elite who had slain Lu Shu, probably wouldn't trouble them anymore. The notion of this provided them with a modicum of security. At another teleportation ward, Lu Yi calmed himself. He examined himself and still he found no abnormalities. But what was the blood-red light that had shrouded him just now? The powerful burst of energy had exposed his location in the most unequivocal manner. He could conceal himself using every faculty and every method known to him, and still, any nearby cultivator would detect his whereabouts and come to investigate. Lu Yi lifted a hand and tapped on his battlefield imprint. He communicated with Li Baxin, recounting what had just transpired. The latter swiftly replied, "That's the hidden feature of the tracking disc, brother." Only through Li Baxin's explanation did Lu Yi come to understand what had befallen him. It seemed that after a whole day and night of chasing the mere mirage of him, Lu Yi's pursuers had grown impatient. Left with no choice, they activated the second function of the tracking disc. As a result, they couldn't trace his movements through the tracking disc anymore, but he too could no longer remain hidden. According to Li Baxin's explanation, the same blood-red pillar of light would occur every 2 hours to broadcast his location. The information left Lu Yi's heart sinking to the depths of despair. He had been able to sense the enemy approaching each time prior to this, enabling him to escape in advance. The intangible connection between him and the tracking disc was what allowed him to perceive their proximity to some extent. That was what led Tan Sheng and his companions into several rounds of back-and-forth pursuits to no avail. Lu Yi had believed that so long as his teleportation wards were not destroyed, he would be able to stay alive and Tan Sheng would never catch up to him. He had clearly misjudged the situation. Being unable to catch up to him was what drove Tan Sheng to make use of the tracking disc's hidden feature. By truly depriving him of any chance to remain hidden. The spiritual power eruption of the unique gold amulets occurred every 6 hours, which was already too high a frequency for his comfort. Yet this blood-red column of radiance would broadcast his position every 2 hours. This was tantamount to a death sentence. "I'm calling for help, Lu Yi. Hold on. You must stay alive until the Colosseum closes." "I understand." After ending the communication, Lu Yi immediately left his hiding place and moved outside. With his position exposed every 2 hours, there was no point to continue staying in the cave. He did not have many teleportation wards left and each vertical light display would inevitably lead to the destruction of one of them. To ensure his survival, he needed more teleportation wards and to preserve as many of them as possible. Lu Yi didn't doubt Li Baxin would reach out for help. They have had numerous contacts and their circles of friends were wider beyond his comprehension. With many powerful cultivators of the Grand Sky Coalition here inside the Colosseum, there was no reason to believe that Li Baxin's call for aid would go unanswered. However, he knew that he couldn't count on help to arrive. He needed to prepare for the worst and respond as proactively as possible. Just as Lu Yi was preparing for what was his biggest escape for dear life up until now, news about him spread rapidly within the Thousand Demon Ridge circles within the Colosseum. Countless Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators flocked in the direction of Lu Yi's last known location, especially those with moderate cultivation ranks. Cultivators of this sort roamed the Carnage Colosseum for endowment events. The Carnage roster was just beyond their reach due to their inadequate power and strength. But all of them were attracted by the rumors about Lu Yi's whereabouts flying about everywhere. The promise of huge rewards for Lu Yi's head was more than anything winning the Carnage roster could offer. More so, since the rumors further circulated that Lu Yi was merely a cultivator at the Third Order of the Cloud River realm now being marked with the curse of a tracking disc that would reveal his position every 2 hours. Anyone who stumbled upon him could have a real chance at slaying him. That made many Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators hurry this way the moment they got wind of the rumors. Amidst the turmoil, a number of unfortunate Grand Sky Coalition cultivators found themselves beset by troubles. The spread of Thousand Demon Ridge and Grand Sky Coalition cultivators should have been even at first, but when a significant number of them who were members of the Thousand Demon Ridge began to converge in a single direction, opposing cultivators would find themselves being outnumbered all of a sudden. That caused many Grand Sky Coalition cultivators, especially those who were unaware of recent developments, to withdraw from the area. 2 hours passed, then 4 and 6. A lot of information about Lu Yi spread far and wide every couple of hours. Every time a blood-red pillar of light speared up into the clouds, his position would be exposed, and that immediately attracted hordes of Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators eager enough to try their luck. Yet, no one had truly managed to find him. Leveraging what remained of his inventory of teleportation wards, each time his position was broadcasted, he would swiftly relocate 200 miles away. Several months had passed since Lu Yi last faced such a massive manhunt in the Spirit Creek battlefield. Only this time, the perils that beset him far surpassed anything he had experienced before. Cultivators in the Spirit Creek battlefield could barely compare with the Cloud River realm cultivators here. By the time Lu Yi reached Heaven 8 back when he was still in the Spirit Creek battlefield, there were few dangers that could threaten his safety. He was even a scourge that all of the Thousand Demon Ridge Coalition feared when he rose into Heaven 9. But this time there really was a real risk of dying. most primarily because of the restriction of the Colosseum that no cultivator inside could leave the Colosseum before its closure. Or he would have sped to the nearest Divine Trade Association and sought refuge and protection there. As time passed, Lu Ye's number of teleportation wards dwindled. Only 2 remained. Had it not been for his diligent efforts to reconstruct more wards whenever he could after each escape, he would have long run out of wards. At the same time, he could feel the presence of Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators in the area growing rapidly. He could stay in this accursed place no longer. Even with 2 teleportation wards still working, to linger in this place would be courting death. If anything were to happen to the wards, he would be dead the moment his position was revealed again. Lu Yi did not know whether he should stay or leave. But he quickly came to a decision. He needed to leave, fast. Only by leaving this area could he find a glimmer of hope. Stay any longer and death would come for him. Lu Yi gazed up at the crimson sky overhead, feeling the crushing weight of helplessness. It had been almost 20 days since the start of the Carnage Colosseum. When would it finally close? Once again, his body was enveloped in that blood-red radiance before the glow burst into a claret-red pillar of light that shot up into the high heavens. Another eruption. Lu Yi activated his teleportation ward and transported himself instantly nearly 200 miles away. Next, he exited the cave and took off, gliding at a steady pace at no more than 30 meters above ground so as not to attract any unwanted attention. Chapter 528 Lu Ye's flight again. The rising number of Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators had prevented Lu Yi from being faster. At the slightest sign of disturbance, he had to halt his movements and rely on glyph concealment to maintain his cover. He quietly made some calculations. By his reckoning, he needed to get out of this area and travel as far as he could, and only by doing so within 2 hours could he secure a better chance of survival. The 2-hour duration passed quickly. Once again, the same blood-red glow swelled over the surface of his skin before it erupted into a bright pillar of crimson shooting up into the sky. No cultivator nearby, unless they were blind, would miss such a conspicuous spectacle. Lu Yi swiftly consumed several spirit pills and wings, conjured by spiritual power, ignited like flames on his back. Activating glyph wings, he flapped his magically formed pinions and sped into the distance in a streak of light. With his position now exposed and no teleportation wards to rely on anymore, his own speed was pretty much all he could depend on. Lu Yi might be just a 3rd order, but with glyph wings his speed could match that of 6th or 7th orders. But with the addition of glyph windwalk his speed would be even faster. Dots of light flashed up ahead, streaking jets of light that must be Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators who were nearby and were coming to investigate the crimson column of light earlier. The newcomers caught sight of a ball of red hurtling towards them at an incredible speed and they froze in surprise, coming to a halt. The speed of a cultivator's flying speed was oftentimes seen as a demonstration of one's cultivation rank. The faster a cultivator could fly, the stronger and more powerful he must be, flying using some magical ability or telekinesis alike. For this reason, weaker cultivators would find it challenging to escape from stronger opponents, as fleeing was often futile. When they first saw the red glowing ball of lighting that was Lu Yi approaching them, the coterie of Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators initially assumed that it was one of theirs, a Thousand Demon Ridge elite. It wasn't until Lu Yi flew past them that the battlefield imprints on the back of their hands flashed with a garnet red luminescence and they finally realized what was happening. It was not a friendly cultivator from their own faction, but an enemy from the Grand Sky Coalition. And the effusion of spiritual power from the stranger was not as powerful as they had expected. He was just a 3rd or 4th order. A 3rd or 4th order of the Grand Sky Coalition? One of them snapped back to his senses fast enough to exclaim, "That's Lu Yi." He was the first to circle around to give chase immediately. Being a 5th order, he had nothing to fear about a 3rd order. So did the rest of his companions, who immediately halted in their tracks and sped after him. But all it took was a quarter of an hour for Lu Yi to throw them all off his trail. Dejected, they lamented mournfully at how they had let such a tremendous opportunity slip through their fingers. Lu Yi no longer bothered to conceal himself. With glyph wings in full swing, he darted through the skies, blazing past numerous Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators along the way. Clearly, no one had anticipated such temerity from him. Just like the first group he encountered before, no one was able to react in time to stop him at all. News blazed across all corners of the Colosseum grounds, reporting the current whereabouts of Lu Yi, while massive waves of Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators swarmed after him like bees hunting for honey, keen to not lose his trail. Lu Yi never stopped shoving spirit pills into his mouth to keep his spiritual power replenished. The continued use of glyph wings was enough to exhaust his spiritual power quickly, which he would not have enough to last for the entire, or even a half, day since he was just a third order. But even with the pills, it was still barely enough to keep up with the consumption. And this was without even activating glyph windwalk. If he were to do so, the drain would be even more extreme. But time wasn't waiting. The next 2 hours came by and the deep scarlet column of light blasted into the sky once more. A comet of light shot by him. Someone must have seen the spectacle and rushed over. That was fast. Lu Ye's mind went before he could even move a finger, and he knew at first glance that even with glyph wing, his fleetness was nothing before such insurmountable speed. He did not need to be told that it was an 8th or a 9th order. The reality of helplessness, the crushing weight of resignation, set in. Was this his moment of reckoning? With glyphs, wings and windwalk, he had no need to fear anyone below the 7th order. Even 7th orders. But 8th and 9th orders were a completely different reality. But he knew he needed to try. A resolute determination ignited within him, and he activated glyph windwalk, increasing his speed further. However, this sudden burst of speed also broke the dam in him, causing his spiritual power to gush like a hole. The Thousand Demon Ridge elite was visibly astounded by this sudden increase in speed. Angrily he shouted, "There's no escape for you, Lu Yi. Surrender now and I might grant you a swift death." The voice sounded familiar and Lu Yi immediately recalled who it was. Wei Kei. What rotten luck. Why am I seeing this scoundrel everywhere I go? He mused with bursting annoyance and frustration. In the midst of his rapid flight for survival, another flash of light shot up from below with the crescendoing rise of a meteor. Lu Ye's face turned pale as he tightly gripped his golden body token in panic. He secretly mustered his spiritual power, ready to use this last life-saving trump card. The huge displacement of spiritual energy from the new stranger was also a 9th order. Caught between the anvil and the hammer, he could see no way out of this predicament. Lu Yi had chosen to walk away from Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan because there was only just one golden body token, and in desperate situations he could rely on it to save himself, or at least buy him a few more hours. But if Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan also ended up with him, they would only be faced with inescapable doom. As the newcomer drew nearer, Lu Yi was so close to triggering the golden body token when his voice echoed in Lu Ye's ear, "Run!" The shimmering presence of the newcomer brushed past him in the blink of an eye, intercepting Wei Kei and stopping his pursuit. Bursts of spiritual power effusion rippled as the two elite cultivators engaged each other in a fierce battle. "Thank you, senior brother." Lu Yi managed to call out before darting away like a lightning bolt into the distance. He didn't know who it was. But whoever the person was, he had appeared at the most opportune moment possible by intercepting Wei Kei, and he was an ally from the Grand Sky Coalition. Maybe he was one of those Li Baxian had called in a favor for help, or maybe he just happened to be passing by. Regardless, it was because of him that Lu Yi had narrowly escaped calamity. Feeling grateful, Lu Yi sped away expeditiously. He found a secluded spot not long after that where he landed. He needed to recover. The constant fleeing had been taxing and he couldn't afford to miss any opportunity to replenish himself. Barely minutes later, he heard a cascade of deafening booms, thunderous explosions in the air of something, or someone, breaking through the air barrier. It must be the Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators catching up. There was no way for him to remain completely hidden at all, not without his position being exposed every 2 hours. He might be safe, for now, for he knew that it would not be long before he needed to be on the run again. He had to move quickly and avoid staying in one place for too long to prevent being surrounded by a horde of Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators. He had a quick bite and swallowed a few more spiritual pills before he resumed his escape. There was no need to activate glyph wings yet. Without being exposed yet, there was no need to be overly hasty. More than an hour had elapsed and the sanguinary-colored beam of light tunneling up into the sky would be erupting soon. By that time, Lu Yi would need to use glyph wings once more and speed like the wind. Escaping alive seemed more and more arduous by the minute, and the tracking disc's curse made it impossible for him to elude his pursuers. Every time his position was broadcasted, a huge stampede of angry and bloodthirsty Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators would be hot on his heels. Without any means to hide himself completely and remain undetected, there was very little a third order like him could do. Fleeing with all his might. That was pretty much all he could do. That would buy him as much time as possible, plus praying for the Colosseum's closure to come quickly. Luck did not seem to be favoring Lu Yi at the moment, as evidenced by the arterial red dome-like force field of the Carnage Colosseum that refused to fade. In the meantime, Lu Yi did not fail to notice how his name had plunged down the rungs of the Carnage roster, landing in the 7th position. He would later encounter several more overpowering 8th and 9th orders. He would struggle to get away from them. He was at least lucky enough to have help arrive on time to cut them off and stop them from tailing Lu Yi. If help in the form of Grand Sky Coalition cultivators who arrived just in time to save him could be chalked up to coincidence at first, Lu Yi did not need to be a genius to know that the repeated instances of timely interventions by allies here to save his life hinted just how greatly Baxin and Feng Yuechan's influence was. By now, all Grand Sky Coalition cultivators within the Colosseum would have noticed the massive host of Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators thronging. If anyone were still oblivious about what was going on, then Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan's rallying of their allies would have made sure of that. Fierce clashes erupted in many areas as a result between the cultivators of the two major factions, leading to a bloody all-out battle royale raging through the whole Colosseum. Usually, most cultivators, except for a handful of elites who were on their last-minute hunting spree for more Carnage points, would choose to lie low when the Carnage Colosseum neared its conclusion. Satisfied with the rewards and opportunities they had garnered up until that point, their primary goal would mostly be focused on self-preservation. Yet this time, instead of curtailing violence and conflicts, the confrontation between both factions had just intensified several times over. High up in the skies, Lu Yi was flying at the highest speed he could muster with glyphs, wings and windwalk activated. But despite his breakneck pace, a cultivator, engulfed in a comet's fleeting blaze, had been chasing him relentlessly for miles, and another stream of light was rapidly closing in from a dozen miles behind. The one closer to him was an 8th order while the other was a 9th order, which were precisely the only ones who were able to catch up to him. 8th and 9th orders. There were 3 enemies at first, but one was thwarted by a Grand Sky Coalition ally who had appeared out of nowhere, leaving only 2 still hot on his tail. That did not make the situation any better at all. The 8th and 9th orders were rapidly and steadily narrowing the gap. The speed of the 2 more superior cultivators clearly outstripped his, especially the 9th order, whose approach was visibly more accelerated. It had been over a day since his frantic escape began. No one would have believed that a 3rd order would survive such a massive and long manhunt. Much credit was due to the assistance of several Grand Sky Coalition elites, but above all, it was Lu Ye's remarkable speed that had kept him going. But he was at his limits. His spiritual power was all but almost fully spent despite his continuous intake of spiritual pills and the mental stress of being constantly hunted, plus the pressure of facing imminent life-and-death situations was overwhelming him. Yet even in such dire circumstances, Lu Yi had never thought of giving up. During one of his brief moments of rest when he passed by here before, he had constructed a teleportation ward somewhere around this vicinity. The ward might have not been properly hidden and he lacked time back then to set up other magic wards to guard it, but if he could only find enough time to create a makeshift teleportation ward, he could immediately teleport himself there and shake off these 2 pursuers. Chapter 529 Limits. Despite having an escape plan thought out, Lu Yi could still not shake off his pursuers. There was just no chance for him to construct another teleportation ward. He attempted to construct Glyph, Void in midair, hoping to establish a magical connection with a distant transportation ward. If successful, this would instantly warp him out of his current location and transport him directly to the faraway teleportation ward through eldritch means. But that was easier said than done. Constructing Glyph, Void indeed was a formidable challenge for Lu Yi. Unlike the glyphs he could easily obtain from his tree of glyphs, mastering Glyph, Void required starting from scratch and rigorous practice. As he hadn't fully grasped its conjuration yet, he couldn't wield it as effortlessly as his other glyphs. The glyph was incredibly complex, consisting of over 3,000 yin-yang pairs. Even if Lu Yi was given a chance to construct it, the attempt would still take quite some time, on top of the prevalent risk of failure. At his current condition of fleeing for his life and his spiritual power wavering violently like a ship in a storm, there literally was no opening available for such a perplexing task. After several attempts, he reluctantly gave up. All of a sudden, he sensed a powerful surge of spiritual power coming from below him. A colossal energy blast shot skyward from below him, trying to swallow him whole. Lu Ye's skin went as taut as a bowstring as a dreadful chill snaked down his spine. He instinctively twisted himself at an angle that even he would have thought impossible, narrowly the magical attack. But the enemy clearly wasn't going to let him regain his composure. More spells screamed at him. Lu Yi looked closely. It was a ninth-order spell cultivator who had been lying in ambush below him, waiting for the opportune moment to strike when he passed from above. He had to have been in contact with at least one of the two pursuers, or else, such a well-coordinated ambush should have been impossible. As the numerous magical spells flooded his sight, as he felt the sheer destruction about to befall him, Lu Yi could only manage a helpless and despondent sigh. This is it. I've reached my limit. The hail of spells bore down on Lu Yi, drowning him in blast fury. The spell cultivator and the pair of pursuers could barely contain their excitement at the sight of success. Especially the two pursuers, who had experienced firsthand the sheer speed and prowess of their quarry. If it weren't for the ambush laid ahead, they might still be struggling to catch up to Lu Yi. Now, with Lu Yi overwhelmed by the onslaught of spells, they were confident that no third order could survive such an excess of destruction. He could very well be dead. This somehow worried them, for if Lu Yi were reduced to dust and bones, they would have no evidence for them to claim their prize. Just as a myriad of doubts raced through their minds, at the heart of the still raging aftermath of the magical onslaught, a dazzling golden light burst forth revealing a still living Lu Yi. "That's impossible," cried the spell cultivator who initiated the attack from below in shock. He could think of no way a third order could survive such a fierce and inordinate assault by a ninth order. Lu Yi should have been gravely injured if not slain outright. Yet, to their disbelief, Lu Yi, amidst that golden radiance now covering every inch of his skin, emerged unscathed. What on earth is that golden light? A golden body talisman paper? But even a golden body talisman paper did not have such potency to fully negate such a substantial amount of damage. This completely defied all his understanding. Seeing Lu Yi still charging forward like a destrier bolting across a plain, the spell cultivator took off to join the chase. Regardless of what that golden light was, he couldn't let Lu Yi escape. The pursuit intensified. As soon as their distances closed, the spell cultivator unleashed his spells once more. Lu Yi did his best to evade the hails of attacks raining down on him. But he just couldn't escape the devastating precision of the spells that struck him, and he tumbled through the air uncontrollably like a rocking barrel. It was all the ninth-order spell cultivator could do while his eyelids twitched involuntarily with disbelief. Despite being battered again and again and his body tossing about listlessly in the air, Lu Yi remained enveloped in that shimmering golden light, not showing the slightest trace of injury. "This is no ordinary golden body talisman," the spell cultivator mused. "Its protection is far too formidable for a mere talisman." "Bring him down, don't let him escape again," a voice echoed from behind. It was the other ninth order elite, one of the pair of pursuers from earlier, who was catching up. The spell cultivator nodded, immediately joining up with the newcomer, exerting even relentless pressure on Lu Yi. Wrapped in golden light, Lu Yi tumbled and shook about wildly like a die in a cup. Despite his desperate efforts, he struggled to avoid their onslaught. The spells hammered on him, eliciting ripples spreading across and intermeshing upon the surface of the aureate aura that shielded him, all without inflicting the slightest harm, yet leaving him careening through the air uncontrollably. That spoke volumes as to the overwhelmingly potent protection granted by the golden body talisman, that each attack, despite being deadly and precise, had failed to do anything more than just alter his trajectory. "Get down?" Lu Yi's mind was still swimming through the midst of dizziness when a furious shout rang out from above. A flash of light swept by, a spiritual power bolt that pounded at him, causing him to jerk involuntarily before he plummeted like a meteor from the heavens. Lu Yi slammed heavily into the ground with a resounding crash. The impact split open the earth, leaving a deep crater in the ground. Lu Yi hastily scrambled to his feet, only to find three figures hovering in midair over him, circling him menacingly. The first was the spell cultivator who had tried to ambush him earlier, and the other two were the Thousand Demon Ridge elites who had been pursuing him all the way here, both combat cultivators. One of them wielded a long-bladed saber that emanated a sharp and fierce aura. The one who had knocked him out of the sky was most likely the one with the saber. As he rose to his feet, the trio recommenced their assault, barrages of spells, etheric energy bolts fired from weapons, and the shimmering sparkles of flying weapons came crashing down on him. The innumerable series of impacts smashed unforgivingly into Lu Yi's figure, tossing him up into the air with his limbs flung into a chaotic ballet of anguish and disarray. Like a puppet severed from its strings, he danced an unwilling performance as he soared through the air, disoriented and unable to regain control. By the time the attacks had found their mark and what residual dregs of spiritual power around settled, he once again fell to the ground. "That's the golden body token," exclaimed the combat cultivator wielding a blade, his eyes twitching involuntarily with apparent surprise. Even with the combined onslaught of 3 elite cultivators, 2 Ninth Orders and 1 Eighth Order, nothing had managed to penetrate the golden aura's protection, let alone inflict any harm upon Lu Yi. That this had to be the protection accorded by the extremely rare and absurdly potent golden body token was unmistakable. Nothing else was capable of offering such inexplicably unyielding and sturdy defense. As a divine protection that even divine ocean realm cultivators could barely defeat unless its allotted time was up, the 3 Cloud River realm elites could practically do nothing but stare helplessly. "That's the golden body token?" the spell cultivator gasped with disbelief, his heart wrenching at the sight of the aureate luminescence. Indeed, the golden body token was such an immensely precious item that many would deem it synonymous with an extra lease of life. For such an invaluable item to have fallen into the lap of a mere Third Order and he had even used it. Had they known Lu Yi possessed such a valuable treasure, they would have chosen a more discreet and lethal method of attack, ensuring a swift and fatal strike. But the die had been cast and all regrets were too late. Where did this fellow get the golden body token? How could his luck be so outrageously good? As the two discussed furtively, Lu Yi rose to his feet once again, glancing around with a bitter taste in his mouth. He might have survived, but he still couldn't escape. "Don't even think of running. You're not getting out of this," warned the spell cultivator. They might not be able to harm Lu Yi, not with the golden body token protecting Lu Yi, but they could still restrict his movements. The protection of the golden body token was not without its limits. Once its time was up, Lu Yi would be dead. As far as the trio was concerned, Lu Yi was nothing more than a sheep ready for the slaughter. Escaping was impossible. The only question was when. When would they be able to put him to the sword? "You know what? I won't," Lu Yi declared. He sat cross-legged on the ground and extracted some spirit pills. The long and arduous escape had greatly depleted much of his spiritual power. Before he could do anything else, replenishing his power was the first and foremost thing to do. The Thousand Demon Ridge trio did not even try to stop him. After all, there really was nothing they could do. Seconds ticked by as minutes turned into hours. The trio barely took their eyes off him at all, afraid that he might be up to something. But there Lu Yi sat, moving not an inch while he never stopped stuffing spirit pills into his mouth. Within moments, Lu Yi had consumed nearly 10 spirit pills, much to the astonishment of the 3 enemies. While many cultivators use spirit pills to replenish themselves, more often than not, most relied on spirit stones instead. Swallowing too many pills within a short span of time could lead to a heightened risk of toxicity from the pills accumulating in their bodies, thereby affecting their own cultivation progress. The buildup of toxic residues would require a long period of healing and recuperation. However, considering that Lu Yi could meet his end at any moment, it was understandable that he had little regard for anything else. Suddenly Lu Yi opened his eyes. He glanced at the 3 enemy elites and spoke. "The rewards offered by the various sects and orders of the Thousand Demon Ridge for my head should be substantial enough for all of you to last a lifetime. Congratulations." The enemy cultivators showed no intent to respond to that cryptic message. But the saber-toting combat cultivator shot a glare at Lu Yi, his stare alert and wary. "What a pity though," an undeterred Lu Yi continued, "your plan to divide the reward equally among yourselves will be dashed. In just a short while, another burst of light will erupt from me and reveal my position to everyone nearby. I'm sure many, which I'm sure will number in the hundreds or even thousands, will flock here quickly. So here's the big question. Who will be the one who cast the fatal blow on me? How will the spoils be divided then? With so many people, even if the rewards are rich and huge enough, once it's split among everyone, there won't be much left for each individual." The trio furrowed their brows as they listened to Lu Ye's words. It was true. Despite their silence, the 3 enemy cultivators had been communicating with each other secretly about this exact matter. They were aware of the fact that unless the effectiveness of the golden body token wore off prematurely, Lu Ye's location would inevitably be exposed to everyone else. But they knew that the eldritch protection of the golden body token could remain operating for a very, very long duration. And what Lu Yi had just said was the worst possible scenario that was very likely to occur. "What are you saying?" asked the spell cultivator deeply. "You 3 have defeated me. I have no complaints about that. If I were to die by you 3, so be it. That's what you deserve for your skills. However, I would feel somewhat resentful if not insulted if I were to die at the hands of a lesser cultivator. Therefore, I don't wish for too many people to come here, Lu Yi explained calmly. Then his tone shifted. As it happens, I am quite well versed in ward casting. So if you're inclined, I might be able to construct a concealing ward that might be able to mask the commotion that will happen later. Maybe this will help to prevent others from discovering me. The Eighth Order showed a hint of interest. And you expect us to believe that you're as helpful as that? Lu Yi responded indifferently. I might not be a Cloud River Realm elite, but I'm still a figure of certain renown myself. If I must die, then I'd rather not have too many people witness my death. Of course, whether you believe it or not is up to you. Whether I set up the ward or not is also your decision. The combat cultivator with a saber turned to glance at the spell cultivator. I seem to remember that you've practiced ward casting before, Lu. Is it possible to build a concealing ward as he said? Lu Ye's eyes twitched when he heard that. The spell cultivator named Lu responded calmly, yes, it's possible. Lu Yi was left speechless. His plan had been foiled. He had hoped that if the three of them agreed to his proposition it would allow him to build a teleportation ward right under their noses. Then, before they even realized what was going on, he could escape in the blink of an eye. Yet of all things, the spell cultivator was also trained in ward casting. What terrible luck. Chapter 530 So close. I shall build the ward, you both can watch the perimeter, said Lu, the Thousand Demon Ridge spell cultivator. His companions nodded. Each of them took up positions to the left and right of Lu Yi, their unwavering gazes remained fixed on Lu Yi. Lu brandished several ward flags, casting them into the air where they magically planted themselves into the ground, indicating the four cardinal directions. The finesse and skill with which he handled the flags was a testament to his considerable proficiency in the art of ward casting. However, even among cultivators in the Cloud River realm, ward cultivators could barely boast of any extraordinary feats yet at this point, let alone a spell cultivator who had also studied ward casting on the side. With the ward flags deployed, Lu began his work. Lu Yi sat there and watched him indifferently. Moments later, he suddenly burst into laughter. Time is running short, Lu. Silence. Lu glowered, his face flushed with anger. Building a ward was no easy work. It was a feat that demanded a considerable amount of time and skill. Given enough time, Lu could indeed construct a proper concealing ward, but what he lacked in skill could hardly keep up with the scarcity of time, which was a luxury they did not have. No one knew when the next eruption would occur. Yet, when it happened, their location would undoubtedly be exposed. Already tense, Lu Ye's taunting words from Lu Yi stacked even more stress on Lu. In a moment of carelessness, he felt a tremor in one of the ward flags he had been coordinating. He sensed imminent failure. If he could not stabilize his ward flags in time, all his efforts would go to waste, and it might be too late to recover. But as a spell cultivator who only dabbled with a bit of ward casting, there was little he could do to remedy the situation, even if he wanted to. As he continued his attempts, his ward flags trembled even more, growing increasingly pronounced like trees shaking in a storm. His companions furrowed their brows, looking unamused. They might not be well versed in ward casting, but even they discerned that something was amiss. Just as Lu was in a panicking frenzy, a ward flag flew out of nowhere and embedded itself within the ward's arrangement, instantly stabilizing the trembling flags. Your ward casting is pathetic, Lu Yi remarked casually. Another ward flag flew out with a wave of his hand, seamlessly integrating into the incipient ward. Lu, at a loss for words, could barely react. He didn't know whether to stop Lu Yi or not, although he ultimately refrained from intervening. One ward flag after another flew out, and before he knew it, the embryonic form of a large-scale magical ward had taken shape. The speed and dexterity of Lu Ye's finesse left Lu in awe, the latter realizing that Lu Yi was miles ahead of him in the mastery of ward casting. Small wonder Lu Yi managed to stir up such a storm during his time in the Spirit Creek battlefield. Rumors had it that he possessed the ability to defeat the defensive wards that guarded the strongholds of all the Thousand Demon Ridge sects and orders there, but Lu had initially thought it was nothing but an exaggeration. Clearly there was more to Lu Yi than met the eye. That was such a level of proficiency in ward casting that even true Lake Realm ward cultivators might find it hard to keep up with. Beyond any doubt, Lu realized, Lu Yi must have visited the heavenly derivative Sects 100 Wards Tower. He must have benefited a lot from his visit there. There was no way he could possess such a profound understanding of ward casting otherwise. He was correct on all accounts. While it was one thing for Lu Ye's exceptional talents in ward casting to have played a significant role in how good he was, the most crucial reason for his remarkable proficiency in ward casting was the immense benefits he obtained from the 100 Wards Tower. That single journey through the tower had brought about a transformational improvement in his understanding of magical wards, leaving a lasting resonance that persisted until this very day. It would not be a stretch to call the 100 Wards Tower of the heavenly derivative sect the anathema of all Thousand Demon Ridge Ward cultivators, for only cultivators of the Grand Sky Coalition could enter the tower. At the same time, those from Thousand Demon Ridge could never set foot inside throughout their entire lives. While Lu was still immersed in his contemplations, Lu Yi was already done constructing the glyph prerequisite for the core of the concealing ward. Luminescent lines stretched and zigzagged, extending to cover an area of more than 300 meters. Lu's eyelids twitched with awe and astonishment. Even as an enemy, he couldn't help but admire Lu Ye's flair. The mere act of constructing glyphs out of thin air was a luxury he could never dream of achieving. The ward was complete. The saber-toting combat cultivator spoke up at last. "Is that really a concealing ward?" Lu grumbled a sour yes in response before turning his gaze toward Lu Yi. "But don't you even think that you can escape death just because of this?" Lu Yi responded pensively, "As I said, I simply prefer my death to be private. Now that the concealing ward is in place, let me set up an aura suppression ward. The commotion during the eruption will be incredibly intense, and a mere concealing ward might not be able to block it all." Unfazed by any reluctance or objections, Lu Yi continued constructing his next ward. Ward flags soared into the air, swarming in all directions as they arranged into the outline of a ward. He stood within the circle of the ward's outline, ensuring not a single flaw was visible as he channeled his spiritual power to construct the elements needed for glyph, void. The atmosphere grew thick with the spiritual power aura permeating the environs as each yin-yang element after another rapidly formed and spread out. But Lu Yi knew how glyph, void was the most complex glyph he had encountered to date, 3 times more intricate than glyph, fire phoenix in fact, and that demonstrated just how daunting this endeavor was. Even though he had attempted to construct void spirit patterns numerous times before, the risk of failure remained. He surreptitiously hoped for success while focusing his mind to the utmost. Luck was on his side this time. The process went flawlessly. Glyph, void was almost done. All he needed was another 20 seconds to finish the remaining 3/10 of the glyph, and he would be able to magically convey himself to safety. All that was left was for Lu, the enemy spell cultivator, to not notice what he was actually doing. Given his knowledge of ward casting, there was the risk that he could see through what Lu Yi was up to, and what Lu Yi was building was hardly an aura suppression ward at all. Lu Yi discreetly stole a glance at Lu and detected the look of astonishment in his eyes. He was completely entranced by how Lu Yi was performing his marvels as if he had fallen into a dream. For someone who practiced both the spell and ward cultivation, witnessing someone as skilled as Lu Yi constructing such a complex glyph was an undoubtedly rare and profound experience. It held the promise of bestowing upon him some profound inspiration, potentially elevating his own abilities to new heights. "It's done. At last." Lu Ye's heart settled as he finally finished. And that was before the shrill scream of a spiritual power blast came tearing through the air as the attack, fired using a saber, slammed into the almost formed glyph, void. With a deafening roar, the spiritual power disturbance in the atmosphere left by the attack caused the glyph to disintegrate into nothingness. Lu Yi scowled darkly as he raised his gaze towards the saber-toting combat cultivator who had intervened, a burning desire to rush forward and kill him with his bare hands. "I was so close," Lu Yi mused sourly. "What was that for, Xia?" The spell cultivator called Lu snapped out of his immersive stupor, looking at Xia Liang with confusion. Was that an aura suppression ward that he was building? Xia Liang inquired. No, Lu shook his head. He could certainly recognize an aura suppression ward, but even though he knew about that right from the start, he did nothing to stop Lu Yi. He could see no way that Lu Yi would be surviving beyond today, hence he chose to not intervene. But what was more, was how quaint and peculiar Lu Ye's method of constructing glyphs was, that Lu wished for more time so that he could observe Lu Ye's work more closely. "I knew it," Xiaoliang coldly gazed at Lu Yi. "If it's true that you don't want people looking at how you die, then you could have slit your own throat right now. Why bother with these futile attempts?" The other two quickly grasped that realization. Lu Yi had helped them to set up a concealing ward just so he could disguise his attempt of building a ward that would be to his advantage. Whatever trick it was he was trying to pull off, it was evident enough that he harbored ulterior motives. a behavior that contradicted his earlier claims entirely. If this really was going to be an inevitable death for him, then there was no reason for him to be trying to hatch some furtive plot. Therefore, this had to be some measure of defiant resistance, a sign that he was unwilling to give in without a fight. The three enemy cultivators regarded Lu Yi with an unfriendly stare. Lu Yi remained seated in silence, his eyes cast down, offering no defense. At that moment, it came, the eruption of a blood-red column of light that burst forth from inside him. The glow that shrouded him transformed into a towering pillar that soared into the sky. The expressions of the 3,000 Demon Ridge elites darkened grimly. The concealment ward had failed to contain such an extraordinary phenomenon. Their half-hearted expectations after waiting here for so long were in vain. With Lu Ye's position now exposed, it was only a matter of time before the entire horde of 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivators converged here. All three of them might be powerful and influential enough in their own right, but there was no way for them to drive and keep everyone away while they hoarded the chance to kill Lu Yi to themselves, not without incurring the wrath of the many. As expected, just moments later, a group of 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivators arrived at the scene. The group of four had a sixth order as the strongest member in their number and a fourth order as their weakest member. Judging by the similar attire they were clad in, they seemed to be members of the same sect. What was just intended to be a casual investigation turned out to be a surprise for them when they found a trio of ally elites clustering around a figure donning the mask of a fiendish demon while emanating a dazzling golden aura. That is, the leading sixth order of the group was taken aback at first, although he quickly grasped the situation. That was none other than Lu Yi. However, what puzzled the newcomers was why were these ally elites merely surrounding Lu Yi instead of eliminating him? Surely everyone in the Colosseum knew by now the substantial bounty that Lu Yi's head would fetch. The squad of four maintained a safe distance several dozens of yards away, cautiously observing while not wanting to invoke any misunderstanding and aggression from their own friendly elites. But as time passed, more and more 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivators arrived at the scene, and most of them were left perplexed and bewildered like the first group, failing to comprehend what was going on. Until a few powerful elites arrived. They strode straight up to Lu Yi and exchanged words directly with Xiao Liang and his companions. Some even tried attacking Lu Yi, but regardless of their might, their attacks could only send him tumbling around without inflicting even the slightest harm. Soon the truth began to spread around. Lu Yi had somehow obtained a golden body token, and he had cast its divine protection upon himself. Now protected by its invincible shield, he was impervious to any attacks unless the token's effects waned. It was simply impossible to kill him at the moment. Some of the cultivators knew about the boon of the golden body token, but most did not. It took some time for everyone to finally understand its significance, and when they finally did, they couldn't help but marvel at the divine protection bestowed upon him. Until the token's power diminished, nothing could breach its defense. Even a divine sea realm cultivator would salivate at the prospect of possessing a golden body token. Who would have thought that a mere Cloud River Realm Third Order would somehow find one and be able to use it? What a lamentable waste. After all, Lu Yi's fate was sealed. The token's protection would eventually vanish and he would die. What a pity to squander such a rare and invaluable asset. At last, everyone eventually learned the reason why those 8th and 9th Order elites were merely encircling Lu Yi instead of attacking him. This situation ignited the notion of chance and ambition in the hearts of many, especially the weaker and low-tier cultivators. With their relatively low cultivation rank, it was challenging for them to be able to have any chance of killing Lu Yi. But what if, in the very instant the token's effects dissipated, they were lucky enough to deal the killing blow themselves? Chapter 531 Into the Grave with Him. Every time the spectacle of the sanguine red column of light repeated, the 1,000 Demon Ridge horde that congregated around Lu Yi swelled as more cultivators arrived. Barely 6 hours had elapsed, but the 1,000 Demon Ridge Ninth Orders alone had numbered more than a dozen, while those of lesser ranks that made up the bulk of the entire horde had grown to several hundred men strong. The Ninth Order elites circled around Lu Yi, surrounding him in a ring of steel as they openly discussed ways to deal with him, a deplorable act of blatant audacity. Some did not like how the situation was developing at all. Xiao Liang and his two companions, they were the first to have cornered Lu Yi here, in particular. The rewards which should have been theirs and theirs alone had just become an early Christmas for everyone here. In the brief deliberation, an understanding between all parties was swiftly achieved. Of the rich bounty for Lu Yi's head, 2/10 of the full share would go to Tan Sheng for his dissemination of the information about Lu Yi. Such was the pact he had made with all Thousand Demon Ridge elites in the Colosseum, and it could not be altered. The next 2/10 share would go to Xiao Liang and his other two companions. They were the ones who had managed to pin Lu Yi down here. Without their help, this would still be another endless chase. No one could nor would dispute that claim was well deserved for their pivotal contributions. The rest of the share would be divided into two halves. The first half would be equally shared by all Ninth Orders, while the other half would be distributed evenly to all the lesser cultivators present. It was a plan that would come no nearer to please everyone, but it was the best one the elites could come up with for now. Even before his last breath, the enemies, like a pack of hungry wolves, were waiting to claim their share of his death as if it had become a virtual certainty. With the discussion duly completed, all that remained was to endure the interlude of waiting. The wait for the expiration of the golden body token's protection that would signal their triumph. Seated amidst the gargantuan mass of Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators, an unfazed Lu Yi was calmly consuming more spirit pills to replenish himself. He could care less about any ogling onlookers, and they did not do anything to stop him either. After all, with the effects of the golden body token still protecting Lu Yi, any attempts to hinder him would only prove futile. In mere hours, Lu Yi's spiritual power had been fully restored. Nonchalantly, he even retrieved a piece of jerky from his storage sphere and consumed it with gusto. As he chewed at his food, he peered around and beheld a few familiar faces. There was Tan Sheng, who had arrived more than 2 hours ago and was glowering at him from a distance, positively sour at how things had turned out. If only he had managed to vanquish Lu Yi swiftly enough to seize the coveted top spot on the Carnage roster. But now, not only had his rank on the roster slid down into oblivion, even his share from the bounty had been diminished to a mere fraction. To say that his losses were undeniably severe was an understatement. Not far away from Tan Sheng, Lu Yi spied Wei Kei engaged in jovial conversation with familiar acquaintances. Amidst the disarrayed crowd, Lu Yi also spotted the Jiang brothers. The back of every Thousand Demon Ridge cultivator's hand glowed with a crimson luminescence. Lu Yi's emitted a distinct blue radiance, a singular light amid the myriad hues of red. Sensing Lu Yi's gaze, Zhang Liuzi and his brother looked up, and a slight nod from Lu Yi met their eyes. His composure took Zhang Liuzi and his brother by surprise. Whether Lu Yi was just feigning bravado or was genuinely fearless despite the impossible odds, they did not know. That a third order who depended solely on the duration of a golden body token's eldritch protection to stay alive while being surrounded by a host of enemy cultivators of greater number and power than him could maintain such unwavering composure was something completely unimaginable to Jiang Liuzi, much less replicate the feat himself. Lu Yi was surveying the crowd around him when his battlefield imprint registered the arrival of a new message. He looked down and saw it was Li Baxian. "Hold on, Lu Yi. I'm getting help." News of Lu Yi being held up here by hundreds and even thousands of Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators had prompted more to join the massing throng. So much so that even Grand Sky Coalition cultivators soon realized what was going on. That sent Li Baxian, who was hiding somewhere 20 miles away with Feng Yuechan, into a state of panic. But there was little he could do. Being just Fourth Order cultivators, they did not have the means to save Lu Yi from such indomitable peril. However, given the current situation, their anxiety was futile. Both of them possessed only Fourth Order cultivation, making it impossible for them to rescue Lu Yi amidst the encirclement of numerous powerful foes. Hence they could ill afford any rash actions. Their only recourse now was to enlist help from as many Grand Sky Coalition elites as possible. But to even penetrate such a huge encirclement of powerful foes would require a force of at least 24 or more Ninth Orders. Making this a nigh impossible feat to launch a rescue without enough strength would only spell defeat if not suicide, and the animosity between the Thousand Demon Ridge and Grand Sky Coalition would ensure that. Roping in enough men would have been doable had they had enough time. The rest of the Ninth Orders might have seen what Lu Yi was doing, but they paid little heed to his subtle movements. Seconds ticked by. The more spirit pills Lu Yi consumed, the more spiritual power was seeping into the glyph now hovering just over his chest. His store of spiritual power diminished, but his aura was gradually growing stronger, steadily surpassing the level expected of a third order. A measure of the auric displacement of his spiritual power would yield that he had reached the levels of a fourth or fifth order. It was a peculiar situation that began to arouse widespread wariness among the crowd. "Cease whatever it is you're doing, Lu Yi, or I," one of the enemy cultivators sternly warned. "Or what?" Lu Yi snapped at the speaker, who fell silent. Indeed, what else could they threaten him with? Beating him up? With the effects of the golden body token still working, who could possibly harm Lu Yi? Threats could do little to him, and even if they were to act, it would just be a waste of time and effort. The enemy cultivator waited for seconds before speaking again. Cooperate obediently and perhaps you'll get a quick and clean death. Try anything stupid and I guarantee you that death won't be the worst thing you'll be getting. Lu Yi couldn't be bothered to pay attention to him. He ignored the jibe and stuffed another handful of spirit pills into his mouth. He had finished all of Sister Shuiyuan's mystic fruit cider, or he could have restored his spiritual power more speedily. The effects of spirit pills could barely compare to mystic fruit cider. In the meantime, the spiritual power stored within the glyph on his chest had reached its limit. But it wasn't enough. Lu Yi could still remember vividly the last time he used this glyph. That gave him the idea of giving a grand surprise to the 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivators here. His spiritual power churned once again, and another glyph similar to the one on his front now appeared on his back. He channeled his power and infused the pattern with his eldritch energy. Lu Ye's expression grew somber as his aura burgeoned. Maintaining the two glyphs required an enormous amount of mental focus, especially since he needed to be supplying a huge amount of spiritual power to both of them. Failure to maintain concentration could see the glyphs crumbling, causing all the infused spiritual power to erupt instantly. Even the golden body token might not be able to fully protect him from such a devastating implosion. The golden body token's effect could fend off threats from without, but it might not be as effective against threats from within. Fortunately for Lu Yi, his mental strength far outstripped most other cultivators of the same rank. So long as he could remain focused, there was little chance of any problem unless he faced significant disruptions. Something's not right. Xiao Liang yelped all of a sudden. The auric displacement of Lu Ye's spiritual power far exceeded that of a third order, the fifth or sixth order in fact, and it was still growing with every ticking second. Even a fool could see that something was amiss. Angry choruses clamored from all around Lu Yi. "Stop playing tricks, Lu Yi," a voice cried. Anyone who didn't know better would have thought that it was Lu Yi who was trying to commit some evil and heinous acts, even though it was Lu Yi who was cornered, surrounded, and trapped here by these sanctimonious scoundrels. More voices piped in, flinging threatening and abusive language. Lu Yi paid no attention to their words. He ignored them and continued channeling more spiritual power into the glyphs. The 1,000 Demon Ridge elites could find no recourse to thwart Lu Yi. Frustrated and helpless, they could only sit on their own laps while Lu Yi continued his work in the peace provided by the golden body token's magical effect. All around him, indignant and seething enemy cultivators could only grumble. Why was the token's protective magic still holding after so many hours? Why hadn't it disappeared yet? Would that it had, then any one of the many Ninth Order elites would pounce at the chance to slay the famous Lu Yi. Chapter 532 Suicidal Attack. The continuous ingestion of spirit pills generated more spiritual power for him, allowing him to infuse the eldritch energy into the glyph hanging on his back as his auric displacement gradually turned as ferocious as a storm. So much so that even the Ninth Orders around him were beginning to feel their senses tingling wildly, warning them of palpable danger. At that very moment, Lu Yi no longer felt like a human to them, he appeared like a volcano on the verge of eruption. "Is he trying to kill himself?" a voice cried. Not even a Ninth Order, let alone a Third Order, would survive being besieged by so many enemy cultivators. If death would be his fate anyhow, it was not a stretch to imagine that Lu Yi might try to commit suicide. Generally, cultivators were never trained to have the means to self-destruct. But as a glyph weaver, who could tell what other quaint and peculiar marvels Lu Yi was able to perform? Many amongst the 1,000 Demon Ridge horde harbored such suspicions, more so because of the abnormal and bizarre state Lu Yi was in. But he could have blown himself up much earlier if he truly wanted to self-destruct. Why now? "He's accumulating spiritual power," someone exclaimed. "He wants to take others down with him." Like a deafening and staggering wake-up call, the words rang as sonorously as a tolling bell. The faces of the Ninth Orders around Lu Yi hardened with trepidation and fear as they immediately retreated in unison. The greater Lu Ye's aura became, the more terrible the detonation would be when it happened. He had been accumulating all that spiritual power all along, deliberately delaying his detonation, just so that he could push the destructive force the explosion would yield to its limit, all to ensure that he could bring as many 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivators to the grave with him as possible. Foolish wish. Wei Kei was barely finished when he strode forward, covering the distance to Lu Yi in just a few strides using his powers. He launched a swift kick, sending Lu Yi hurtling through the air. With a commanding shout, he barked at the rest of his allies, "Send him airborne." A spark of realization flashed across the eyes of the 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivators who saw the merit in the suggestion. If Lu Yi was seeking to pull as many men as he could down with him, then rendering him airborne could make his self-detonation useless. He could blow himself up and the threat posed to others would be significantly diminished. Another cultivator promptly delivered a second powerful kick, propelling Lu Ye's figure skyward. In swift succession, streams of flying weapons converged, relentlessly barraging Lu Ye's form to keep him in the air. The aureate glow-bathed Lu Yi turned into a turbulent whirl of gold midair, rising higher with each tumultuous wave until he hovered dozens of yards above the ground. Every time he was about to descend, precise strikes from flying weapons would thwart his fall, sending him soaring once more. Anyone viewing from afar would see Lu Ye's figure suspended midair, rolling like a leaf caught in a wildly unpredictable breeze. Once again disoriented, Lu Yi felt like a die in a cup with only the golden body token's effect to ensure his safety. He maintained his focus and continued gorging on spirit pills to replenish his waning spiritual power. 20 miles away, Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan were laying low with their senses attuned to the commotion that reached their ears. The former looked into the distance. Seeing how pitiful Lu Yi was being toyed with like a vole in the hands of enemy cultivators made Li Baxin clench his fist and gritted his teeth with such grief and rage that his irises tinged crimson. He watched his junior undergo such humiliation, his heart brimming with a profound sense of powerlessness and sorrow. Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan had managed to muster some allies to help and everyone was positioned nearby and lying low. But their relatively low numbers prevented a high chance of success. A rash move at this critical juncture would only endanger them. To that end, before the rescuers had amassed sufficient strength, caution held them back. Despite whatever anger and frustration now boiling inside them, they could only endure while persisting in their efforts to rally more support. Something drifted past them. Something as shadowy as a wraith. But the unmistakable effusion of spiritual power indicated that it was a cultivator, a Cloud River Realm Second Order. Few Second Orders could roam the Colosseum and yet survive up until now. Most low-tier cultivators, except for those who enjoyed the protection of high-tier cultivators, had been wiped out in the first few days of the Colosseum's beginning. And for those who had managed to stay alive up until today, there was only one possibility: they were ghost cultivators. Only ghost cultivators possessed the skills to extend their survivability. The ghostly figure brushed past Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan before vanishing completely. He trekked for more than 10 miles and looked up just in time to see the figure rolling and tumbling helplessly in the air, bobbing up and down incessantly. The ghost cultivator stood there and stared. That must be Lu Yi. In spite of the mask that obscured his features, his frame and physique were unmistakable, matching the memory etched in his mind. With such a massive congregation of powerful and elite 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivators, there was no mistaking it. That really must be Lu Yi. What a pity, he thought. That a powerful figure who once wielded respect and fear of the whole Spirit Creek battlefield. Allies revered and admired him while enemies quaked with panic at the mere mention of his name, was now suffering such a wretched treatment. Even as an enemy, the ghost cultivator couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. This could be the price of staying in the limelight for far too long, he mused pensively. This was precisely why he had chosen the path of becoming a ghost cultivator, whose forte was concealment and assassination, skill sets that would enable him the chance to preserve his existence in the face of any perilous circumstance. Is what would become of he who was once the most feared figure in the Spirit Creek battlefield? The one who once sat on the throne of the role of supremacy? What is the point of all that when he's still going to be dead the next second? As the ghost cultivator beheld the spectacle before him, he felt emotions simmering in him. Hardly one with a penchant for being nosy, the ghost cultivator wasn't one who derived excitement by being improperly curious. But this was about the famous Lu Yi. The same Lu Yi who, out of every other name that adorned the role of supremacy when the ghost cultivator was still a Spirit Creek realm cultivator, earned his respect. But that respect wasn't for nothing. It stemmed from the fact that he had crossed swords with Lu Yi before. Aside from that one bout of attrition that they had once shared together at one point when Lu Yi was busy climbing the ranks of the role of supremacy, he was also dangerously close to meeting his death at Lu Ye's hands during the latter's visit into the myriad poison forest. To say nothing of the fact that he had ascended earlier than Lu Yi, entering the Cloud River battlefield long before the latter did. Yet here he was just the second order of the Cloud River realm when Lu Yi had already reached the third order. How is this even possible? He almost yelled aloud with indignation. As a second-order ghost cultivator trapped in this carnage coliseum without any connections or allies to rely on, he had spent all the time primarily in seclusion, avoiding danger, and he was fortunate to have survived until now. And now, being able to bear witness to the downfall of such a young hero might have made being trapped in the coliseum worth it after all. Because after today, Lu Yi would no longer exist in this world. On a side note, he began to realize what a potent item the Golden Body Token must be. Despite the endless attacks by so many thousand Demon Ridge elites pummeling Lu Yi, keeping him suspended in the air was pretty much all they could do. Lost in his train of thought, he slowly ambled forward as if in a trance. The shadowy figure of the ghost cultivator came to an abrupt halt. For reasons unknown, an unsettling foreboding welled up in the depths of his soul, a surging dread that warned him of an immense danger ahead, urging him to stop. It was one of his innate gifts, an extraordinarily acute intuition for latent threats. Not part of his cultivation rank nor mental or spiritual strength, it was just part of his instincts. And up until today, this sixth sense of his had saved him from numerous life-threatening perils. Nevertheless, Ghost Cultivator couldn't believe it. He failed to fathom how a place swarming with so many thousand Demon Ridge elites, his allies, would be dangerous to him. He stood there, rooted to the very spot where his footfalls halted with tiny beads of sweat forming on his forehead. After what seemed like a very long moment, he lifted his foot and hazarded a hesitant step forward. Yet, that single step caused his pupils to suddenly contract, and an unprecedented sense of foreboding gripped his heart. Never before had he experienced such a visceral and vivid premonition of peril. He could almost hear the throes of a death rattle in his ears, warning that if he were to venture nearer, then death would come, inevitably. The fine beads of sweat rolling down the sides of his cheeks converged into larger droplets and trailed further down. The ghost cultivator wheeled around at once. He needed to get away, and for that, he abandoned the notion of concealing his presence, bolting with all the haste and urgency his legs could muster into the distance. The still hidden Li Baxian and Feng Yuexian spied the enemy ghost cultivator who had passed by earlier, now retreating hurriedly. That left them both puzzled, failing to comprehend why the enemy ghost cultivator would suddenly look so hapless and panicked. Just then, a powerful surge of spiritual power emanated without a warning from afar. Li Baxian jerked his head back around and looked up. There was Lu Yi, who had been bobbing up and down in midair, his entire form now suddenly engulfed in a radiant inferno by a brilliant blaze that came out of nowhere. The fiery brilliance was so intense that it even eclipsed the golden radiance of the Golden Body Token, that Lu Yi looked as if he was being devoured by tongues of flames. As the tendrils of flames lapped at the air, gorging hungrily for sustenance, intricate and complex glyph-like patterns converged and flowed around Lu Ye's body, expanding in all directions. That's... Feng Yuechan's eyes widened in astonishment as she stared at this scene, completely baffled by Lu Ye's actions. The thousand Demon Ridge elites immediately sensed imminent danger. The violent effusion of spiritual power emanating from Lu Yi indicated an impending detonation, making everyone believe that Lu Yi was on the brink of self-destruction. And judging by the fanfare, the ensuing power would undoubtedly be immense. In response, their attacks grew even more ferocious. Lu Yi, who had originally been a few dozen yards above the ground, ascended even higher. That would go on until he was hovering nearly 200 yards above ground level. That was the limit of the Ninth Order's telekinesis range. Any further and they would struggle to maintain control over their artifacts. If Lu Yi were to self-detonate at this distance, those below would be well out of the range of the blast. Unbeknownst to everybody, Lu Yi had no intention of self-destructing. His goal was to unleash his ultimate ace. The brilliance that had once illuminated the prairies of the Spirit Creek battlefield was now set to be reborn upon the Cloud River battlefield. His spiritual power tossed and floundered like a storm, but that did not stop him from constructing more yin and yang elements, melding them and spreading them in all directions to eventually enshroud himself, the aureate aura of the Golden Body Token still effective. Despite the relentless attacks from the thousand Demon Ridge elites below, all they could do was prevent him from falling back to the ground. All that spiritual power he had stored up in glyph, gathering spirits that he conjured on his back, was sapped dry in the blink of an eye, followed swiftly by the first gathering spirits glyph he built on his chest. Like a broken dam, Lu Yi could feel his powers drawn out of him with the speed and intensity of a surging rapid, while the intricate glyph-like marks around him grew denser and thicker. At the same time, he discovered that he had been mistaken. When he first tried using this ultimate technique, Lu Yi had built 2 glyph, gathering spirit circles to gather enough spiritual power. At the time, he thought that he might not need such preparation if and when he reached the Cloud River realm. He thought that once he reached the 5th and 6th order, he would be able to dole out this ultimate move arbitrarily without suffering any repercussions. He really was wrong. The present situation proved otherwise. He still needed to build 2 glyph, gathering spirit for this technique even though he was now a 3rd order of the Cloud River realm. That led to the assumption that using this ultimate technique would demand even more spiritual power as one ascended up higher ranks of cultivation, but in turn, the resultant blast would also be significantly amplified. Chapter 533 Renascence of the Fire Phoenix. 200 yards above ground, Lu Yi was enshrouded in swirling flames, the golden radiance of the golden body token's effect obscured beneath the blaze's brilliance. Accompanying the surge of these flames, the intricate dance of yin and yang elements rapidly unfolded, intricately intertwining like a mesmerizing symphony. As every ounce of spiritual power stored within the 2 gathering spirits' glyphs was depleted and everything inside him rapidly dwindled, at long last, the labyrinthine patterns of the last glyph he was trying to construct fully took shape. Numerous eyes, all of them belonged to the 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivators, panned up in awestruck silence, their gazes riveted to the spectacle unfolding in the sky. What met their eyes was the sight of an oval-shaped object resembling some kind of beast's egg. Its surface was crusted with intricate patterns that shimmered and glowed, all with Lu Yi cocooned inside its enamel-like embrace. The pulsating radiance resembled an otherworldly form of respiration by an extraterrestrial beast. But the 9th Order elites never stopped their incessant salvos of attacks at Lu Yi, their unceasing efforts rendering the egg-like object floating and bobbing in the air. What the hell is that? That was the same line that flashed through the minds of everyone below. Everyone below, everyone whose minds were riddled with perplexity and curiosity, felt the unshakable and palpable sensation of raging perils radiated from the egg-like object. The sense of foreboding dread gnawed at some, prompting them to turn around and flee. Even the 9th Order elites, once unshakably confident, now felt the stirrings of unease, their skin prickling as if stung by needles. At the same time, still inside the egg, Lu Yi was still channeling his spiritual power, directing what remains of his eldritch energy into the now fully formed glyph that he became utterly spent. The radiance of the spiritual egg intensified, its crimson hue resembling a resplendent sun hanging in the ether. Something's wrong. We need to go. Now. A 9th Order cried, his voice echoing his urgency and anxiety that demonstrated his need to leave at once. The rest of the elites did not need to be told. Next second, all of them vanished, scattered in all directions. Whatever it was Lu Yi was trying to do, it had clearly exceeded their imaginations. Escaping this scene of turmoil had just become their utmost priority. With no more attacks to sustain its altitude, the egg, which had been suspended 200 yards overhead, swiftly plummeted towards the ground below. In its descent to the ground, the surface of the egg suddenly popped with webs of densely interwoven cracks. Something inside was poised to break free. A spine-chilling aura diffused from the shattering egg, an effusion so thick that its displacement distorted the very fabric of the surrounding space. Crack. Crackling sounds cascaded, continuing until, screech. The clear and melodious cry of an avian reverberated through the skies. Accompanying the shrill cry was the crackling din of the egg bursting asunder. Flames surged and billowed, and from within those flames emerged 2 colossal wings, followed by a resplendent and graceful figure. The 2nd Order ghost cultivator whose flight from the scene had brought him dozens of miles away, heard the hauntingly familiar ornithic song. He couldn't help but tremble as his feet turned to lead in his state of panic. He turned around to look, only to be confronted by a scene that sent shivers down his spine. It was a majestic creature with pinions surpassing 100 yards in span and girth 200 yards deep, its exquisite form festooned with elegantly trailing tail feathers and shrouded in blazing flames, a paradoxical and yet gorgeous embodiment of death. Glyph, Fire Phoenix reborn. The ghost cultivator felt déjà vu sweeping through him. He had witnessed the terrible paragon of destruction in all its fiery splendor before, back at the Spirit Creek battlefield where the same spectacle was also conjured by Lu Yi. The latter was trying to trample down the defenses of the myriad poison forest back then, and with this very move, he decimated nearly 200 of the forest's acolytes. The ghost cultivator had narrowly escaped the calamity only because he had fled in advance. Since that day, the graceful form haunted his sleep for a considerable span of time before he finally found peace. And yet, right here, right now, the same scene had once again been visited upon him. But the reappearance of Lu Yi's phoenix was not without its distinction. The phoenix this time appeared to be larger than before, its appearance more vivid and lifelike. Even the individual feathers on the phoenix's form looked more distinct and discernible. Beyond any doubt, the change to the phoenix's appearance must have everything to do with Lu Yi's ascension into the Cloud River realm. The last time Lu Yi conjured the fiery avian, he was still at Heaven 7, which was significantly a long way from the Cloud River realm third order he had achieved now. In the meantime, the ghost cultivator was overcome with a profound sense of relief, grateful for having made a hasty escape before it was too late. Had he lingered, he would have inevitably been ensnared in this blazing crisis. The colossal, flaming silhouette of the phoenix descended from the skies, its intensity and ferocity akin to a mountain crushing down on the horde of Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators. The scorching waves of heat brought not only death and destruction, but also a sense of despair as if, as with all life and things, all hope was being devoured by the inferno. In just the blink of an eye, the gigantic bird of fire covered more than 200 yards, a predator swooping down on prey. The ebullient form was on the cusp of colliding with the ground when it abruptly veered off its original trajectory, gliding at a mere dozen yards above the Earth's surface. Its immense wings flapped gently, its incandescence distorting space and setting anything its feathers brushed aflame that even the Earth was reduced to silica. Agonizing wails of pain and anguish pierced the air, only to be abruptly silenced. Scores of Thousand Demon Ridge acolytes had already begun escaping even before any of them got a proper glance at the phoenix. But it was already too late. Wherever the colossal form passed, men and women were incinerated, the blossoms of their life withering in a mere fiery flash. Such was Fire Phoenix's might that only Ninth Orders stood what semblance of a chance to withstand its terror, even if it was just mere endurance. Everything happened so fast. In what felt like both an instant and an eternity, the uncontrollable trajectory of the Flame Phoenix saw the mythical avian crashing into a hill not far away, in its wake a long and wide trail of scorched earth and charred, lifeless bodies. The chaos gradually subsided. The fleeing Thousand Demon Ridge acolytes, their hearts still pounding with fear, came to a hesitant halt. Those who hadn't fallen in the path of the fiery phoenix secretly breathed a sigh of relief, having narrowly escaped death. However, for those unfortunate souls in its wake, luck was but merely a fleeting notion. Amidst the still smoldering terrain, one figure stood tall as if in defiance to the phoenix's invincible might, a Ninth Order. Petrified to the very spot where he was standing when he resisted the phoenix's searing incineration. He, with his hair and clothes all fully reduced by the fire into ashes and crisp, and every inch of his skin now charred black as soot, looked like a dead tree still standing after an inferno, even though life still pulsed within him. Needless to say, the grievous wounds he suffered necessitated immediate medical attention from a healing practitioner, lest what remained of his life ebbed away. What misfortune that he was caught in the path of the phoenix's flight. Streaks of light shot into the sky, the rest of the surviving Ninth Orders rushing toward where the phoenix made its descent. When they arrived in just seconds, there was Lu Yi lying amidst the blackened, smoking earth, his face pallid white and his vacant eyes staring up at the sky utterly devoid of the strength to move even his fingers. Even so, after what just happened, no one dared to approach Lu Yi too closely. Who could predict what other aces he could still be hiding up his sleeves? Some gritted their teeth in tense frustration, their hearts filled with unease. Just when everyone expected Lu Yi to just self-destruct, he had unleashed a last-ditch attempt that had unexpectedly succeeded in claiming the lives of countless Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators instead. Even when they finally realized what he was up to earlier, they were powerless to stop him. No one could, not with the Golden Body Token's magic still operating. Unless they fled before Lu Yi could do anything. But that would have presented Lu Yi the chance to escape too. Lu Yi remained unfazed by the litany of curses directed his way, feeling instead troubled by the deluge of dizziness assailing his head. Golden stars danced before his eyes, and he felt feeble and powerless, completely bereft of vitality. Even the surface of his skin was splitting open, leaving his entire body drenched in blood-red web-like trails. It was exactly the same as the last time he had used Glyph. Fire Phoenix? He did not need to be a genius to know why. He still lacked sufficient strength to properly use Glyph. Fire Phoenix, and as an aftermath, the drawbacks of unleashing the Glyph overwhelmed him physically. While he could still use the glyph so long as he had enough time and spiritual power, he could still not quite fully master and control the technique. Otherwise he wouldn't have crashed here. He would have steered the Phoenix to chase down every Ninth Order he could find. Streaks of flying embers resembling fireflies floated towards him from a particular direction, embedding themselves into the battlefield imprint on the back of his hand. These were the contribution points of the fallen Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators who were killed. Meanwhile, high above the celestial expanse, upon the Carnage roster, the name Lu Yi, that had been teetering on the brink of slipping beyond 10th place, emitted a faint glimmer before it soared to reclaim the top spot. His Carnage points tally of 7,110 instantly doubled, skyrocketing to 15,620. The significant increase in Carnage points showed that in just one fell swoop by using Glyph, Fire Phoenix, Lu Yi had just slain at least 40 to 50,000 Demon Ridge acolytes, which was just a small number relative to the full number of Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators who were rallying here earlier, not even a tenth of the entire horde. The early realization had given them ample time to react and disperse, allowing the Phoenix to eliminate enemies within just one designated bearing. Crack. The faint, crisp chime of broken glass resonated in the depths of everyone's hearts right at that moment, followed swiftly by the fragmentation of the morbid claret-red canopy above them that marked the Carnage Coliseum's entire length and breadth, shattering like a smashed mirror. Lu Ye's eyes squinted reflexively as the first shaft of light reached him as the brilliant luminescence of the sun came down to once again bathe the world in a golden embrace. The Carnage Coliseum has concluded. It has finally ended. Coincidentally, or not, it closed just after Lu Yi had reclaimed the top spot on the Carnage roster. As for whether this was purely coincidental or a twist of fate, Lu Yi knew very well which it was. Whatever had befallen him, everything was just too conveniently aligned, so much so that he could only attribute it to heaven's touch of preordained design at play. However, the closure of the Carnage Coliseum seemed to hold little significance given his current predicament. Multiple enemy Ninth Orders were encircling him, and with his spiritual power all but fully spent, there was no hope for escape. The conclusion of the Carnage Coliseum stirred a commotion, or displeasure, especially in the case of the Ninth Order who was holding the top position up until Lu Yi knocked him off the throne. Frustration and indignation boiled in him at the inopportune loss. Had the Coliseum ended just 10 seconds earlier, before Lu Ye's final act of defiance, then he would have clinched the top spot, and the reward of the Primus-level Wisp of Sanctification, along with 9 gold amulets, would have been his. Yet, this mere 10-second difference had cost him the one thing he coveted the most, the Wisp of Sanctification and a Primus level 1 to boot. How could he not feel enraged? He couldn't help but wonder if the heavens were making a fool out of him by allowing a man condemned to death to claim the first place on the Carnage roster. He failed to see any sense in that. Countless beams of golden light descended from the skies, a shower of gold with each aureate droplet streaking with shimmering streamers towards the Ninth Orders present. Being in the midst of the multitude of enemies, Lu Yi received a tiny golden speck of light falling down on the back of his hand, forming another mark separated from the battlefield imprint. This must be the heavens distributing the rewards at the end of the Colosseum. That was when it dawned upon Lu Yi. The gold mark would allow him to claim his rewards within the Vault of Providence dimension. So this is how the heavens grant the victor's rewards, Lu Yi mused. He had initially thought that whatever rewards would be directly bestowed upon the winners. But now, it appeared that he would need to make a trip to the Vault of Providence himself, which rather made sense since some might not be conveniently ready or able to receive their rewards yet. With this arrangement, anyone could retrieve their rewards from the vault whenever they saw fit, which became the source of exasperation for many of the Thousand Demon Ridge elites now clustering around Lu Yi. To most if not all of them his fate was sealed. Once the effects of the Golden Body token diminished, he would die and along with him the prize of winning the Carnage roster. What a waste. Temporarily sparing his life so that he could first retrieve his rewards wasn't something that they would like to bet on anymore, especially after the chaotic and lethal turmoil he had just stirred. No one would dare to let him draw another breath of fresh air ever again. If anything, they were all just waiting for the divine protection to fade before striking. Chapter 534 In Heaven's Name. Like a dying fish's mouth agape for breath, desperately seeking the elusive embrace of air, Lu Ye's shallow, labored breaths were occasionally punctuated by fits of coughing. After a brief eternity, he managed to muster a fragment of his strength. His vision spun, and all around him were the furious yet wary visages of the enemy Ninth Orders like a flock of vultures circling him. "What a wretched soul you are, Louis Yi." Wei Kei's voice reverberated, dripping with venom. Turning his gaze toward the sound, Lu Yi beheld a rather comical sight. A bedraggled Wei Kei whose hair looked like flames singed it. He hadn't exactly fared well, even though he had survived Lu Ye's last attack, having been visibly frightened by his Phoenix too. While he hadn't sustained physical injuries, the sheer terror had left its mark. Deep inside he was thanking the stars that he was not caught in the path of the Phoenix fire, or he would have been severely wounded, if not dead. Lu Ye's coughing intensified, each bout threatening to rack his body apart. Despite the agony, he forced himself into a seated position, his blood mixing with the earth beneath him, painting a grim tableau of crimson. Gazing pensively at Wei Kei, Lu Yi spoke impassively, "You can't wait to end my life, no?" Wei Kei retorted icily, "You still think there's any chance of you walking away from this alive?" Lu Yi remained silent. Wei Kei continued, his tone laced with derision. "Did you think we wouldn't notice powerful Grand Sky Coalition cultivators lurking nearby, waiting to rescue you? But given the current circumstances, do you think they would dare to intervene? Your fate is sealed. It's time to let go of any lingering delusions." "Is that so?" Lu Yi allowed his head to droop, his long hair forming a shadowy veil over his eyes, shielding his countenance from the harsh sunlight. He surreptitiously tapped a finger on his battlefield imprint and relayed a message, "You don't have to come to rescue me, Brother Baxian. I'll be taking my leave, so we'll meet again in 1 month." 20 miles away, Li Baxian, who had been closely monitoring the situation, received this message. Once reading the message, his expression shifted to a mixture of astonishment and suspicion. At first glance, it seemed as though Lu Yi had resigned himself to a certain death, but when coupled with the last sentence, the context changed entirely. Lu Yi specifically mentioned in 1 month. The only thing that brought to mind was the 1-month restriction period that followed any cultivator's exit from the Cloud River battlefield. During this period, cultivators were prohibited from re-entering the battlefield. Such was the rule set by the heavens that no one could alter. Hence, the implications in Landiel's words could not have been any more crystal clear. He intended to depart from the Cloud River battlefield. "Wait, Lu Yi. What are you thinking of doing?" Li Baxian hurriedly inquired. Lu Ye's response came through expeditiously, "Right from the start, brother, the only thing stopping me from leaving was the Carnage Coliseum. But now it's no more." Li Baxian blinked in surprise, and then a realization dawned upon him. He had been so deeply concerned about Lu Ye's safety, rushing around to rally for help while attempting to devise a plan to rescue him, that in the process, he had lost sight of the most important point. Indeed, all along, it was the Carnage Coliseum's eldritch restrictions that had been preventing Lu Yi from escaping. Now that it had ended, there was no longer anything to confine him. The Thousand Demon Ridge enemies assumed that Lu Yi would be theirs to slaughter once the effect of the Golden Body token faded. Little did they know that the diminished restriction of the Carnage Coliseum now meant that Lu Yi could leave whenever he wanted to. Although doing just that would incur a very, very steep price, to say nothing of the fact that this particular method that Lu Yi had come up with was something that few could emulate. When weighed against the preservation of one's own life, no expense would appear too exorbitant. As for Lu Yi, Li Baxian never doubted whether Lu Yi had the wherewithal to make such a maneuver. After all, Lu Yi had amassed such wealth that few in the Cloud River battlefield could match. Li Baxian could still not quite forget how Lu Yi had once purchased 2-point restoration pills, each worth 150,000 contribution points, in a single transaction for him. He could count on one hand the number of cultivators of similar rank who could possibly match Lu Ye's opulence. Especially since he had just amassed an impressive increment of almost 10,000 contribution points after decimating so many enemy cultivators. "Let's go. We're leaving." Li Baxian called out to Feng Yuechan. An incredulous Feng Yuechan was completely bewildered. "What about Lu Yi, Baxian?" "Lu Yi has his own way of escape. Our job here is done," Li Baxian answered cheerfully. His former tension and worry evaporated, replaced by an inexplicable sense of tranquility and relief. Feng Yuechan looked puzzled, but it did not take long for something to click in her mind. "Lu Yi is planning to use that method to leave the Cloud River battlefield, isn't he?" Li Baxian nodded. "Precisely." Feng Yuechan sighed softly. "Wow, Lu Yi really is rich. No wonder his progress has been so rapid." They swiftly sped away as they talked, at the same time relaying word to the rest of the Ninth Order allies whom he had rallied for help to inform them that Lu Yi would be fine and it was time to go. More than 20 miles away on the black and scorched plain, Lu Yi immediately contacted Xia Qianshan right after he was done with Li Baxian. Up until now he recognized Wei Kei by face, but he had always been unaware of the latter's name and the sect he belonged to. Since Xia Qianshan was always well informed about such matters, Lu Yi decided to ask her. A response from Xia Qianshan came moments later. Wei Kei of the Clouded Sun clan. Lu Yi raised his gaze and cast a deep, unfriendly and yet meaningful look at Wei Quebec. Their eyes locked, and the latter furrowed his brow, sensing a palpable measure of hostility. Still, the situation dictated that there were few reasons for him to be afraid of Lu Yi. Lu Yi appeared unlikely to be able to even stand unassisted, let alone pull off any other tricks anywhere nearly as destructive as the one he had just displayed earlier. Every one of you here wants to be the one to kill me, eh? Lu Yi surveyed his surroundings. Someone growled in a low tone, "What a pointless question. When the token's effect runs out, that's when your clock ends. I'd be hoping for the effect to last as long as possible if I were you, just for a little extra time." Lu Yi exhaled heavily, maybe. Supporting himself on his knees, he slowly rose up. He faltered, wobbling unsteadily as he straightened up, "But I guess I'm sorry. You're all gonna be disappointed." "Quit playing games, Lu Yi," one of the Thousand Demon Ridge elites sneered. "You would have been dead hundreds of times over if not for the golden body token. Dispense with all that grandiloquence. If I were you, I'd be digging a grave right now, unless you're hoping for scavengers to deal with what's left of you." "True enough," Lu Yi conceded, nodding. "Without the golden body token, I would have long been killed already. But what can you say? I did really have the golden body token to keep me safe." His voice crescendoed increasingly loud and resolute. "I shall remember this day, gentlemen, the hospitality and generosity you have showered upon me today, and if the opportunity arises, I shall surely repay it in kind." Such audacity set off a wave of anger sweeping through the remaining horde of Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators. Was Lu Yi out of his mind, some wondered? Did he not grasp the circumstances he now faced, others thought? Why was he talking about retribution when he could very well be dead any time now? As doubts swirled within the host of enemy cultivators, they witnessed with their own eyes as Lu Yi suddenly flung his head backward, gazing skyward with his outstretched arm as he let loose a resounding cry. "In the name of the heavens on high, I, Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood Sect, hereby call upon a divine opportunity column." The words only just left his lips when a dazzling blue glow blazed at the back of his hand, followed by a sapphire beam of light that shot up into the sky. Simultaneously, the countenances of the Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators surrounding Lu Yi twisted in shock, few amongst them with even dawning amazement. Since the outset, a vague sense of something amiss had taken root in their minds, although the feeling of suspicion was initially subdued by the awe and terror of the phoenix earlier, followed by Lu Ye's hefty collection of bounty from those who perished because of it. There was hardly any time for deep contemplation. Now, however, the very reason for the foreboding finally manifested. Everyone had overlooked the fact that Lu Yi could invoke upon the name of the heavens a divine opportunity column. His sole chance to escape from this dire predicament. Divine opportunity columns were sacred objects created by the heavens, and they could typically be found at every divine trade association branch, the strongholds of various militant sects and orders, plus their outpost in dimensions such as the Spirit Creek battlefields. These were divine opportunity columns one could access without charge. However, there were certain instances where getting access to a divine opportunity column demanded a price. For example, within certain sacred sites scattered across the Cloud River battlefield, the pillars of celestial mechanism were not intrinsic to the land itself. Instead, cultivators would petition for their presence. There were also arcane glades scattered across the Cloud River battlefield, for instance, that were equipped with their own divine opportunity columns. These glades did not appear with their divine opportunity columns. It was the cultivators who summoned these glades that needed to petition to the heavens and pay the heavy price for them. Divine opportunity columns stood as conduits bridging the ethereal expanse between the Cloud River battlefield and their strongholds in the real world of Jianghu. For convenience's sake, these mystical obelisks facilitated access into the Vault of Providence, in addition to enabling seamless transitions between the battlefield's dimension and the real world in the event of an invasion on the arcane glade. But only a scarce number of arcane glades across the vast expanse of the Cloud River battlefield could afford to have divine opportunity columns. To have a column in a glade demanded an exorbitant price, a staggering tithe of 100,000 contribution points. Few cultivators, especially Cloud River cultivators who were usually bogged down by their meager reserves of contribution points, could ever afford such a price. Most cultivators would rather direct their contribution points towards augmenting their personal cultivation with little remaining to be spared. Therefore most cultivators scarcely dared to dream of having divine opportunity columns of their own. Therefore, it was only the bigger arcane glades with a larger capacity to house more cultivators that have their own divine opportunity columns, where the cost of purchasing the mystical obelisk from the heavens could be shared amongst the members of bigger arcane glades. The mitigated cost would make the substantial cost a manageable feat. That was also the reason behind Feng Yuechan's amazement about Lu Ye's wealth upon learning of his bold plan. The sheer wealth the latter commanded was nothing short of astonishing. To wield 100,000 contribution points was a rarity within the Cloud River battlefield, a feat beyond the reach of mere handfuls, and Lu Yi happened to be one of them. Before being trapped inside the Carnage Coliseum, Lu Yi had accumulated a substantial 92,250 contribution points. Yet today his tally had soared to an impressive 161,200. That was 30,000 more than what he owned when he first entered the Cloud River battlefield. That was all thanks to Glyph, Fire Phoenix, which was the one thing instrumental to this resounding achievement, or he would still be short of contribution points to reach 100,000. Now that Lu Yi finally had enough contribution points, he could summon a divine opportunity column for his use. As he told Li Baxian, it was only the Carnage Coliseum that had denied him escape. With the arterial red dome-like shield of the Coliseum preventing his exit, he could still call upon the heavens for a divine column opportunity, but it would still do him no good. But now, with the Carnage Coliseum concluded and its crimson veil lifted, Lu Yi was now free. Nothing and no one could hinder his passage anymore. Meanwhile, the surrounding Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators finally grasped what Lu Yi was trying to do. Xiao Yang's voice thundered in anger, "Stop him! Stop him now!" A sweeping scythe of light hurtled towards Lu Yi. Xiao Yang's attack, a resplendent cascade of gleaming arcs aimed at Lu Yi, rent the sky. Such a formidable display of might and valor by the Ninth Order. Too much had been given up to corner Lu Yi here. Victory was just within reach. All that remained was for the effect of the Golden Body token to end and Lu Ye's life would be theirs. Yet, Lu Yi was going to summon a divine opportunity column on the brink of their triumph. Would they allow him? No, never. If they were to let him slip out of their fingers again, then all the painstaking efforts up until this point would become meaningless. All the sacrifices that they had made, all the lives lost on his account, everything would be in vain. And once news of this got out, the cultivators of the Grand Sky Coalition would never stop tormenting any Thousand Demon Ridge members they met with ridicule and scorn. Just how incredibly rich is this brat? 100,000 contribution points. Xiao Yang mused. For all his life, he had never come near to having that amount of points before. A barrage of attacks converged from all directions, bearing down on Lu Yi. Simultaneously, a beam of light descended just in time from the skies above, enshrouding Lu Yi within its luminous embrace. The onslaught of assaults crashed against the cylindrical barrier of light, each strike swallowed by its sheer brilliance. On the other side, within the confines of this protective column of light, Lu Ye's cold and unyielding gaze panned from one face to another, etching the countenances of these Ninth Order elites deep in his memory. Chapter 535 Escape. Enveloped within the column of light that tunneled straight up into the skies, the mighty currents of air surged around Lu Yi, the folds of his robes and the locks of his hair floundering in violent fits in the tumultuous winds. Salvos of flying steel and streaking lights came swooping down on Lu Yi, only to be thwarted by the resplendent pillar of light. Rumble? Something ponderous and large plummeted from the heavens, landing squarely before Lu Yi. As soon as the object slammed into the ground, a tempestuous shockwave erupted from the point of impact, sweeping outwards in all directions and throwing all Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators around into disarray as all of them tumbled like leaves in the wind. By the time any of them had just regained their footing, their gazes panned up just in time to see Lu Ye's outstretched hand placed on the stone of the divine opportunity column before him. Until we meet again. Lu Ye's voice echoed, his figure swiftly fading into ethereal wisps before vanishing altogether. The Thousand Demon Ridge elites all gazed with awe and silence, their hearts seething with frustration. Lu Yi was gone. More than 800, if not 1,000, Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators had joined in this hunt. From this number alone, there were over 29th orders, making this a host of sufficient strength to give even a true Lake Realm cultivator a run for his money, never mind a mere third order. Still, despite the odds, they had failed. He had once again eluded their grasp and triumphed. The rarely seen and hugely coveted golden body token, the invoking of a phoenix, even if it was just a mere image of the mystical vermilion phoenix, capable of rending the heavens and sundering the earth, plus the summoning of the enigmatic divine opportunity column, all of these marvels had manifested within one singular being and just one alone, Lu Yi. It was precisely due to these inexplicable and yet fortuitous circumstances that a third order like Lu Yi managed to slip through their grasp in the end. The expressions of the enemy Ninth Orders contorted with dismay as they gazed at the divine opportunity column that had been the instrument of Lu Yi's escape. There was no longer any point in blaming either luck or themselves. The Carnage Coliseum had ended and Lu Yi was gone. That was all that mattered. One after another, the 1,000 Demon Ridge elites left. All that was left in their wake was the solitary divine opportunity column. The lonesome obelisk of divine magic that was the testament and relic to Lu Yi's unbelievable struggles today. No other third other could have lived through such tribulations and boast of the feats that Lu Yi had accomplished, facing down nearly 1,000 enemy cultivators where most of them were elites who were way beyond his league and yet escaped from them. Hardly anyone would doubt that Lu Yi's name would spread far and wide after this today. In the future, should he return to the Cloud River battlefield, he would undoubtedly attract the attention of many ambitious individuals. Needless to say, eyes would be trained on him the next time he stepped into the Cloud River battlefield. Lu Yi's blood-drenched figure materialized in the Sanctum of Providence at the top of the summit of fortitude of the Crimson Blood Sect main stronghold sitting atop the lofty Mount Ao highlands of Bingzhou province. With wobbling footsteps, he quickly reached out a hand to steady himself against the divine opportunity column beside him to prevent himself from collapsing. Cultivators entering the Cloud River battlefield from the stronghold of their sects or orders could choose to appear anywhere in the Cloud River battlefield, as long as that location had a divine opportunity column. But due to the information inscribed within the battlefield imprint, cultivators would be sent back to the Sanctum of Providence of their main stronghold if and when they were to leave the battlefield. Get Sister Shui Yuan, quick. Lu Yi croaked weakly. Yi emerged from inside Amber and darted outside. She came back seconds later with Shui Yuan beside her. The latter frowned when she saw Lu Yi's pathetic appearance. What on earth happened? It's a long story, sister. Lu Yi managed a weak smile at her, struggling to maintain his clarity. Help. With that, he went limp and collapsed to the ground. Even at the third order of the Cloud River realm, using glyph, Fire Phoenix still inflicted a crippling drawback on him whenever he used it. But he could not afford to lose consciousness before he was away from the dangers in the Cloud River battlefield. Coming back to the main stronghold of the Crimson Blood Sect had assured him that he was finally safe, and that caused him to faint at last. Fortunately for him, Shui Yuan was quick enough to catch him before he crumbled to the ground. His awareness drifted in and out of consciousness like a piece of flotsam in the swirling currents as an overwhelming weariness incessantly stung at every fiber of his being. Many times, in that semi-conscious state, Lu Yi thought he had heard the gentle voice of his mentor Tang Yifeng. His sense of time blurred for a long time, until he suddenly jolted awake. The gentle sound of water lapping against something solid reached his ears. Lu Yi blinked his eyes open, momentarily disoriented before gradually regaining his senses. He found himself sitting inside a giant tub filled with a soothing emerald green broth. Amber was waddling about inside with a contented expression on its face. Sensing Lu Yi's gaze, Amber looked up and purred cheerfully at him. Yi noticed and hurried in. Lighting up with surprise, she exclaimed, "You're awake, Lu Yi?" Lu Yi acknowledged with a wordless grunt and assessed himself. He was doing quite well. His injuries had completely healed. Even those underlying issues that he had been accumulating from his previous other battles were no more. His body still felt weak and his spiritual power was still depleted, but evidently Shui Yuan had worked her magic on him. A day or two of rest and recovery should see him back into full health. "How long have I been asleep?" he asked. 2 days, Yi replied. Lu Yi nodded. Sister Shui Yuan had certainly delivered her proverbial goods once again with her healing skills that far surpassed that of Wuxia. He recalled the first time he unleashed glyph, Fire Phoenix, on his foes. Wuxia had taken several days to nurse him back to health. Shui Yuan only took 2 days. He lowered his head to inspect his battlefield imprint. Name, Lu Yi. Affiliation, Acolyte of the Crimson Blood Sect. Cultivation, Third Order of the Cloud River Realm. Location, Mount Ao range of Bingzhou province. Contribution points, 6,120 achievements. 56. His tally of over 100,000 contribution points had dwindled down to a mere fraction, a consequence of the immense cost of calling upon the Divine Opportunity column. Since the last time he had bought the 2-point restoration pills for Li Baxin, this was his first time spending such a vast amount of points. The point restoration pills at least had the practical use of repairing Li Baxin's spiritual points, but the Divine Opportunity column that he had summoned had no further utility beyond enabling his return to the real world of Jianghu a few days ago. And it would be there indefinitely. There was no way to move it elsewhere at all. If only he was not forced into using so many contribution points just to gain access to one Divine Opportunity column. The sheer amount would have been enough for him to go on a spending spree in the Vault of Providence. While he was reflecting upon his losses, Shui Yuan walked in. She casually inquired, "How are you feeling now?" "I'm feeling better now," he replied. "Good. Now that you're back here, stay indoors for now and focus on your recuperation. Don't get into trouble." "Yes." After hearing of Lu Ye's exploits in the Cloud River battlefield from Yi, Shui Yuan was indignant at the arrogance of Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators while feeling distressed about her junior brother's plight. Being at the Divine Sea realm, there was only just so much she could do for Lu Yi. Back then in the Spirit Creek battlefield, she could forcefully intervene on his behalf, but there was no way she could enter the Cloud River battlefield. She came over and examined him, ensuring that he truly was improving before she finally relaxed. Sister Shui Yuan?" "Yes. I need to get dressed. I was the one who stripped you. There's nothing in that tub that will surprise me." Shui Yuan scowled, rolling her eyes at him before she turned to walk out of the room. Lu Yi did not even know how to respond to that. Lu Yi emerged from his chambers after he was finished dressing. The glaring sunlight blinded him for one fleeting moment as soon as he stepped out of the threshold as the gentle melodies of birdsong and insect chirping filled his ears. Lu Yi stretched lazily as he took in the sweet scent of flowers lingering in the air, appreciating the tranquility of the peace after the chaos a few days before. He called for Yi, but instead he went and found his mentor Tang Yifeng. He paid his respects and sat for a lecture. After leaving his mentor's presence, he was immediately greeted by an irresistible aroma of food wafting through the air. Following his nose, he arrived at the dining hall, where, as expected, Shui Yuan had prepared a table full of delectable dishes. The appearance of food Shui Yuan prepared looked so much more delicious and remarkably awesome than Hua Xi's, even though the food cooked by Hua Xi was just as nourishing. So long as one could ignore how hideous and unappetizing her cooking was, one could still find her food enjoyable all the same. After indulging in a hearty meal and exchanging a few words with Shui Yuan, he headed straight for the summit of bamboo. Shui Yuan had assigned the summit to Lu Yi some time ago, making him the master of the summit of bamboo. That was in conjunction with his ascension into the Cloud River realm. She had allowed him to choose one of the few foothills within the Crimson Blood Sect domain, and Yi suggested the summit of bamboo. It was quite close to the summit of fortitude, and many of his juniors had assisted in the construction of its amenities back then. However, not long after entering the Cloud River realm, Lu Yi entered the Cloud River battlefield, which left him with little time to spend at the summit of bamboo. Now as he arrived he could see pavilions and spires standing out amidst the sea of clouds rolling around them, an almost celestial ambience as if he had stepped into paradise. He entered one of the buildings and casually picked a room, settling down for some time of meditation and cultivation. The main stronghold of the Crimson Blood Sect was just a quiet and empty place devoid of much human activity. With most of the sect's membership being low-tier cultivators aside from Lu Yi and Zhu Jia, everyone else was still inside the Spirit Creek battlefield to focus on their training and seldom returned to the main stronghold. But once the rest of the sect's acolytes progressed further, the stronghold would become livelier once again. Hua Xi should also be on the cusp of reaching the Cloud River realm by now, realized Lu Yi. He stuffed another spirit pill into his mouth as he continued his meditation and practice, restoring his spiritual power. The next day, Lu Yi left the summit of bamboo in a hurry. He first went to Lunarmere to catch some fish before heading back to the summit of fortitude. He looked for Shui Yuan and told her, "I wish to re-enter the Spirit Creek battlefield, Sister Shui Yuan." Shui Yuan looked puzzled. "What for?" 4 Cloud River realm cultivators like Lu Yi, re-entering the Spirit Creek battlefield required paying a certain amount of contribution points. The higher one's cultivation rank, the more contribution points were needed. Shui Yuan, for example, would need to pay several thousands of contribution points each time she re-entered the battlefield. Payback, Lu Yi replied curtly. He had made a promise to the 1,000 Demon Ridge elites before he was transported away from the Cloud River battlefield. He had vowed to repay them for their actions 100-fold in the future. To the 1,000 Demon Ridge elites, those words might be dismissed as mere bravado. But for someone who had just endured such an ordeal and narrowly escaped death, there was no way Lu Yi would let the offense he had taken slide. If anything, he was determined to follow through on his words and cause havoc in the Spirit Creek battlefield. If he couldn't defeat those enemy 8th and 9th orders from the Cloud River realm, then he might as well inflict his wrath on their juniors, those who were still in the Spirit Creek battlefield. If others could take advantage of their strength to bully him, why can't he turn the tables on them and play the same game with the same rules too in the Spirit Creek battlefield? As once the most feared person in the battlefield, no one there could possibly be his match. After all, he needed to reclaim what he had lost, 100,000 contribution points and that golden body token which he was forced to use, from the Spirit Creek battlefield, no matter what it took. Shui Yuan immediately grasped Lu Ye's intentions. Her eyebrows furrowed as she attempted to dissuade him. Forcibly re-entering the Spirit Creek battlefield doesn't grant you free reign, Lu Yi. For a Cloud River realm cultivator like you, it's quite the opposite. Even if you're more powerful, the heavens will penalize you for any lives you take. It's a form of protection that the heavens provides for lower-level cultivators. I know. That's why I want to ask your help on how you managed to withstand the judgment of the heavens. The first time he met Shui Yuan was still vividly embedded in his mind. She was wielding an absurdly wicked-looking battle scythe back then, striking down any adversaries that attempted to come near him. Even as the terrifying judgment of the heavens never stopped tormenting her, she remained unfazed. A warm fuzzy feeling welled up within his heart whenever he recalled that fleeting smile, no matter how much time had passed. Chapter 536, Resurface. The judgment of heavens was a divine mechanism ordained as an inescapable retribution. Thus, Lu Yi needed to unravel the mystery of how Sister Shui Yuan could resist its devastating power. Once he resolved this enigma, he could then roam the Spirit Creek battlefield and do as he liked. Shui Yuan's head swayed sideways wistfully. No. I could do nothing, I was only enduring the pain. Pausing, she continued, her gaze distant. My circumstances are unique, as you might have already realized. Raising a trembling hand to her chest, she continued, since my very birth, I have had another persona dwelling within me, that is Mo Yuan whom you met back then. Most of the time you won't be seeing her. She rarely surfaces, for she appears only when I'm not myself or I am unconscious. Lu Yi nodded in understanding. Lu Yi was oblivious to this when he first arrived at the Crimson Blood Sect stronghold. He had not thought much about why Shui Yuan and Mo Yuan would look so starkly alike. If he were to compare them both, he would only think Shui Yuan as a reduced facsimile of the other. Back then he had mistaken them both as sisters. But over these years he had been gradually piecing together bits and pieces until he had a better picture. Therefore, hearing Shui Yuan telling him the truth did little to surprise him. She possesses an extraordinary constitution that grants her a very high endurance. That is why, though the judgment of the heavens is inflicted upon her after killing a few enemies, it scarcely bothered her. Still, her endurance is not without its limits. There's a threshold that even she cannot cross lest she endangers herself, said Shui Yuan before her narrative flowed on. Twice she came back from the Spirit Creek battlefield with the judgment of the heavens coiling around her, and each time she would retreat into a deep slumber to wait out the judgment until it fades. And since the judgment affects only her, it has no effect on me. There were 2 instances where Wei Yang killed enemy Spirit Creek realm cultivators. Once during the Battle of Golden Tip and the second time when Lu Yi was poisoned by the Heavenly Derivative Sect. The more enemies one kills in the Spirit Creek battlefield, the more powerful the judgment of the heavens will be. Correspondingly, its duration will also extend. So if you are certain of re-entering the Spirit Creek battlefield, Lu Yi, be careful not to kill too many enemies. While I've yet to sample the horrors of the awe-inspiring judgment of the heavens, I assure you, it's not a force to be recklessly courted. A single misstep might well cost you the essence of your soul. And if so, woe betide you, brother. So beware. But surely there are ways to counter the judgment? Countered Lu Yi, still not willing to give up. Such is the retribution of the heavens, brother, Shui Yuan responded with finality. I see, Lu Yi acknowledged. Shui Yuan observed the shadows that flickered within his gaze. She could detect the reluctance and defiance still lingering about Lu Yi. It was clear that he would still re-enter the Spirit Creek battlefield, judgment of the heavens or not. Before he left, she cautioned, "Whatever you do, Lu Yi, practice caution above all else. Do not court unnecessary risk." Lu Yi took his leave with frustration budding in his mind. If he was going to be constrained, being unable to kill enough enemies in the Spirit Creek battlefield to invoke enough fear, then perhaps he should take Biki with him? He could undo the defensive wards of enemy outposts and leave the killing to Biki. But for that to happen, Biki would need to be at the Crimson Blood Sect outposts in the battlefield. Back when he was about to ascend into the Cloud River realm and leave the Spirit Creek battlefield, he had set Biki free from his years of service in keeping the Crimson Blood Sect outposts safe from invasion. The gigantic eagle had devoted itself to that charge solely out of its loyalty to the late Feng Wujiang, Tang Yifeng's first student, and Lu Ye's senior, who was also Biki's former master. Irrespective of whatever it was Lu Yi was about to do, he would first need to get into the Spirit Creek battlefield. If no other solution had presented itself by the time he had reached there, he would just have to limit his number of kills. Lu Yi stepped into the Sanctum of Providence and placed his hand on the Divine Opportunity column to commingle his mind to it. A revelation unfolded. He could not re-enter the Cloud River battlefield anymore, at least not for another month. But the entry into the Spirit Creek battlefield was still open to him, although the response he received from the Divine Opportunity column demanded a solemn toll, the offering of 500 contribution points for his current rank of cultivation. A nominal tribute, one might say, akin to a coin dropped into a fathomless well. At the cusp of his mental wish, Lu Ye's corporeal form vanished and he reappeared moments later, now within the Crimson Blood Sect outpost in the Spirit Creek battlefield. Yet, a tempest of unseen forces came crashing down on him, an arcane current that imposed its dominion upon the very essence of his being. Lu Yi immediately felt his spiritual power being suppressed, the riverine flow of his Cloud River realm Third Order Eldritch essence now truncated to a mere trickle. He knew what it was, the heavens restriction at play. His etheric strength was completely gone with a portion of his spiritual points sealed. For any cultivator beyond the Spirit Creek realm to re-enter the Spirit Creek battlefield, their cultivation rank would be subjugated back to their zenith when they were last a member of this battlefield. Lu Yi channeled his spiritual powers more and more in gradual paces, using the Great Sun Valurium technique to funnel the flow of his eldritch essence into his spiritual points. With his spiritual power surging more smoothly now, his rank of cultivation slowly rose back up. He could feel it. The First Order of the Spirit Creek realm, the Second Order, then the Third Order, all the way until he was restored back to Heaven 9. It did not take long for the acolytes at the outpost to realize that there was someone in the Sanctum of Providence. "Hold up, is that Brother Lu Yi?" one of them cried. Some of them could barely believe their eyes and ears. As far as most of the newer acolytes were concerned, Lu Yi had made the rise into the Cloud River realm quite some time ago. But what was he doing here when he should be in the Cloud River battlefield by now? They rubbed their eyes to make sure that they were not mistaken. Sure enough, that really was their senior brother Lu Yi. But the commotion had attracted the notice of everyone else in the outpost, causing them to overrun Lu Yi with choruses of endless cheers and warm greetings. News of his arrival swept across the outpost like a bushfire raging through a field in a dry season. Lu Yi left the outpost after that and scaled a nearby foothill where Biki made its home. But the nest was empty and the gigantic eagle was nowhere to be found, cutting short his initial plan of letting Biki do the killing for him. A stranger approached, riding atop his flying conveyance that landed with the grace of a falling leaf beside Lu Yi. The person made the sign of a salute saying, "Greetings, Brother Lu Yi." Lu Yi turned his gaze, recognizing who it was, one of the first cohorts of independent cultivators admitted as acolytes of the Crimson Blood Sect, although Lu Yi could not quite remember his name. "You're Tao Jianghu, sir? I'm the present legate of this outpost." Over time, the Crimson Blood Sect outpost had laid witness to several rotations of both its legates and prolegates. Thanks to the abundance of supplies and consumables needed for the cultivation of their power and the luxuriant ambient spiritual qi in the atmosphere surrounding the outpost, the acolytes have all been advancing swiftly. Most of the time, acolytes, upon reaching the Eighth Order, would begin roaming the inner ring areas of the Spirit Creek battlefield. As a consequence, the tenure of the legates and prolegates would often be brief since they became Eighth Orders in no time. Even shorter, in fact, when compared to the tenure of legateship and prolegateship at outposts situated within the inner ring and central areas of the battlefield. Lu Yi bobbed his head in acknowledgement and asked, "Do you know where Biki is?" "Unknown, I'm afraid. It frequents the vicinity of the outpost less often nowadays. It would come back once in a while, but only to depart before too long." Even as Tao Jingyu relayed this information, he could not help observing Lu Yi as astutely as he could. Why had Lu Yi come here suddenly? Tao Jingyu reflected on the events that had transpired since assuming the role of legate of the Crimson Blood Sect outpost, but he could recall no glaring errors on his part at all. With cautious delicacy, he broached the subject. Brother Lu Yi, is there a purpose to your visit today?
Yes.
I have something to take care of, Lu Yi responded casually, his mind drifting into contemplation. With Biki's whereabouts enshrouded in mystery, seeking it out at this juncture seemed unfeasible. But without the giant eagle to accompany him, his ability to kill enemies would suffer, and so would his potential to instill dread within the many sects and orders of the Thousand Demons Ridge Coalition. In the midst of his thoughts, Lu Yi pondered over his dilemma. How would he reclaim the 10,000 contribution points and the golden body token that he had lost on account of the pursuit that had so nearly killed him? Or should he just take this as merely a quest for payback and vent his frustration? With his current proficiency in ward casting, no Thousand Demon Ridge outposts were safe from him. But merely conquering enemy outposts, unless coupled with substantial benefits, seemed to lack meaningful purpose. This left Lu Yi ensnared in a quandary. Truly, reality, often fraught with numerous twists and turns, rarely unfolds as anticipated. In the meantime, Lu Yi's silent reticence was weighing Tao Jingyu down with unspoken pressure. After a pause that felt like an eternity, Lu Yi finally broke his silence. So be it then. Come, we'll see what we can do. However, there was little doubt that whatever he did, it would immediately send every Thousand Demon Ridge sector order into distress. Word of the Annihilator of Sects' return would surely stir apprehension in the hearts of all who beheld it. Given the constraints on the number of lives he could take, Lu Yi calculated that he could only target 1 or 2 enemy sects at most. But that was why he brought along Tao Jingyu, so that the latter could seize the blessings from the enemy divine opportunity columns of the sects and orders he conquered. It wouldn't do to leave any advantage untapped. Lu Yi conjured his flying conveyance, and with Tao Jingyu, they ascended into the skies. Tao Jingyu remained baffled. Up until now, he was still oblivious to Lu Yi's intentions. But he chose not to pry, opting to just follow in silence. The journey was tranquil, a serene voyage. Traveling from the outermost rim of the Spirit Creek battlefield to the core circle demanded a considerable trek, and if Lu Yi still wielded his Cloud River Realm Third Order power, the duration would have been reduced to a mere 2 or 3 days. But now that his current capabilities were restricted to just Heaven 9 of the Spirit Creek realm, the time would naturally be doubled. Thankfully, his current flying conveyance was of a middle grade, granting him greater speeds compared to the lower-tier counterparts, although its singular drawback lay in its heightened consumption of his spiritual power. The infrequent stops along the way to rest allowed Tao Jingyu to gain a profound appreciation for the formidable depths of Lu Yi's power. Prolonged flights using magical conveyances generally strained a cultivator's reserve of spiritual power, and replenishment on the go remained a challenge. Yet, Lu Yi proved himself an extraordinary exception by how he could tirelessly maintain his journey without anything more than a half-hour's rest each day. In a mere 4 days, the duo arrived at the heart of the Spirit Creek battlefield. Lu Yi extracted his map, scrutinizing it closely as he pondered about attacking either the New Moon Sect or the Clouded Sun Sect. Tan Sheng was a member of the New Moon Sect, a fact Lu Yi had confirmed during a casual conversation with Li Baxian, while the Clouded Sun Sect was where Wei Kei hailed from. Both the sect's outposts were situated within the core circle of the battlefield, and Lu Yi knew about them. Back when he was still here, the legates of the 2 outposts had come offering their tributes as a gesture of peace before. Lu Yi might have not personally dealt with them closely before, but he knew them enough. Given the constraint of limiting his kills, he needed to make a careful choice. Ultimately, Lu Yi decided to just attack the New Moon Sect. All the troubles and perils that had compelled Lu Yi to make use of his golden body token to prevent him from dying, and more than 100,000 contribution points to summon the divine opportunity column to escape to freedom. Everything began from Tan Sheng's utilization of the tracking disc. In essence, it was Tan Sheng's fault that everything started. This was a score that Lu Yi wanted to settle, and hence, he would reclaim the losses he had suffered from the New Moon Sect. After another half-day of travel, they finally arrived 10 leagues outside the New Moon Sect's outpost. Lu Yi landed his flying conveyance. He took Amber and handed it to Tao Jingyu, instructing, "Wait here." Tao Jingyu took Amber in his hands, acknowledging him with a nod, and obediently stood in place. Lu Yi dashed straight for the New Moon Sect outpost. He knew that this headlong charge at the enemy outpost was bound to involve confrontation with the enemy cultivators. Having Tao Jingyu, who was only just a 7th order, around in such a skirmish, would pose certain inconveniences. That was why he chose to just leave him away from the fighting with Amber and Yi. To keep him safe was a more prudent decision. In just the blink of an eye, Lu Yi covered 10 leagues, arriving at the front gates of the outpost. The golden dome of the New Moon Sect outpost defensive ward looked like a gigantic bowl of shimmering radiance. The luminescent barrier did not look particularly corporeal, suggesting that the defensive ward wasn't operating at its fullest capacity, which was understandable since no one would actively seek to invade another sect's outpost. No one except a certain individual called Lu Yi. Back when it was known that his newfound ability allowed him to undo the magic of defensive wards, the entire battlefield turned into a chaotic mess. It was only after his ascension into the Cloud River realm did the Thousand Demon Ridge sects and orders here rejoiced at the coming of a more tranquil period. However, no one could have foreseen that the Harbinger of Turmoil would resurface once more after a barely 3-month hiatus, here to again wreak havoc upon the battlefield. Chapter 537 How Dare You? Lu Yi was just outside the New Moon Sect outpost when he lowered himself to a crouch to better observe the luminescent shield of the defensive ward with his glyph, Insight Augmented Sight. This did not go unnoticed by one of the sentries keeping watch. He hurried here at once and growled from the other side of the wall of light, "Who goes there?" There was little reason for his tone to be friendly, not when a suspicious stranger was skulking about outside. Lu Yi pensively shot him indifferently, "Who do you think I am?" The odd question startled the enemy cultivator. He looked at Lu Yi more closely. This time he could almost swear that he must have seen the face somewhere before. Somehow, he was confident that he had never personally met this stranger before, despite the palpable feeling of familiarity. But before he could demand a name, the stranger was already gone. Lu Yi had wandered off to look for weaknesses in the shield to exploit, which he found as he began casting his ward flags. If Lu Yi still wielded the rank of a Cloud River Realm Third Order, he could have easily ripped open the magical shield through brute force alone due to the defensive ward not working at full capacity yet, at a bare subsistence level. But now that he was limited to just the Heaven 9 rank of the Spirit Creek realm, he could only rely on his fundamentals in ward casting. "Hey, what are you doing?" The enemy cultivator barked again, dubious about what Lu Yi was doing. Lu Yi ignored him and continued his work. The enemy cultivator shifted in a swift change of countenance, his gaze falling upon Lu Yi once more. Finally, he realized the reason behind the nagging familiarity of the stranger before him. Indeed, he had not personally encountered Lu Yi before, but he had seen the face before in a sketch. However, it had been nearly 3 months since Lu Yi was believed to have departed the Spirit Creek battlefield for good. It had never crossed his mind that the figure before him was the same Lu Yi who had reappeared once more and right outside the entrance of his order's outpost to boot. "You are that Annihilator of Sects," exclaimed the figure, stumbling backward as though Lu Yi were some ferocious monster, an insurmountable terror. Without hesitation, he spun on his heels and cast into the air a flying conveyance that he hopped on at once, soaring up into the sky, towards the inner cloisters of the outpost with urgent haste as he squawked with the voice of a tolling bell, "The Annihilator of Sects. The Annihilator of Sects has arrived." Catastrophe had fallen on their heads with the unannounced advent of the much-feared Annihilator of Sects Lu Yi. All who heard the cries sank into deep doubt about the outpost's defenses. Multitudes of New Moon Sect acolytes stirred with trepidation and uncertain alarm. A thunderous command rang out, "Who dares utter such nonsense?" As the voice resonated with the force of a thunderclap, a robust figure, riding atop his flying conveyance, emerged from the edifice of the outpost. "Brother Tanley, it's Lu Yi. It's the Annihilator of Sects," reported the sentry who had just left Lu Yi to deliver the ill tidings to none other than the legate of the New Moon Sect outpost Tanley, currently ranked 58th upon the Spirit Creek battlefield's roll of supremacy. Tanley was arguably the most formidable cultivator stationed here. "Say again?" "Oh." Tanley's brow furrowed with skepticism, tingling his thoughts as he wondered if his hearing was failing him. "The Annihilator of Sects. Lu Yi of the Crimson Blood Sect." "That's impossible," bellowed Tanley. "That fellow's a Cloud River realm cultivator 3 months ago. He should be in the Cloud River battlefield by now. How could he possibly be here?" "But I'm sure of this, Brother Tanley. This is not a mistake. That really is the Annihilator of Sects outside there. I have seen his likeness before in a sketch." Tanley's brows knitted together. "Maybe he's just someone who looks like Lu Yi?" Not that resemblances were hardly uncommon occurrences, but most of all, Tanley was unwilling to believe that the Annihilator of Sects would be here, just outside this very outpost at this very moment. He's trying to bring down the defensive ward as we speak, sir. What? Tanley gasped with unbridled astonishment. As if to prove the sentry's point, the control gem that allowed him the full helm of the defensive ward's operation was trembling. Before he could even extract the control gem from inside his clothing to have a proper look at it, a streak of light jetted across the distant horizon, arriving in the blink of an eye. It really was the Annihilator of Sects, Liu Yi. He had encountered Liu Yi before. Tanley was the one leading the New Moon Sect contingent of cultivators in the Thousand Demon Ridge entrapment of Liu Yi on the outskirts of the Myriad Poison Forest. That was why he knew Liu Yi. But Liu Yi hardly remembered him. Given how many enemy cultivators he was facing at the time, it was only just understandable. What mattered to Tanley was why did Liu Yi come back? What was his reason for coming back to the Spirit Creek battlefield, and why, of all places, here? A colossal blend of incredulity and apprehension loomed in Tanley's mind. While his expression remained solemn, his countenance betrayed not a trace of agitation. If it were the Liu Yi of old, the same Liu Yi who was just a Heaven 9 cultivator, then he would be truly afraid. But knowing that Liu Yi could only be here by forcefully entering the Spirit Creek battlefield as a Cloud River Realm cultivator, there was little need for undue concern. To expect that he would triumph against Liu Yi in an all-out skirmish would be futile. There was no discounting the various feats the latter had accomplished back when he still reigned over the entire battlefield with terror. At least Tanley was certain that he would never best Liu Yi in a fight. Still, not that it mattered anyway, not now. Would Liu Yi dare to kill anyone with the same savageness as he once did? The judgment of heavens was no trifling matter. If more elite cultivators were allowed to casually kill and raise to their heart's content, then all outposts, those belonging to all big and small sects and orders alike, would have long been laid to waste by now. But why is Liu Yi here? Tanley wondered with dread. Is he not afraid of the judgment of the heavens? At any rate, he was sure that Liu Yi did not come as a friend. After all, he was a member of the Grand Sky Coalition and the members of the Thousand Demon Ridge. If anything, all major sects and orders in the Ridge wanted the head of Liu Yi on a silver platter more than anything. Who could tell how much Thousand Demon Ridge blood had been spilled because of him? How many friends and allies of theirs had he slain? To describe him as a veritable harbinger of death would not be an overstatement. With this notion at the forefront of his thoughts, Tanley advanced a few paces, his countenance grave as he regarded Liu Yi. You should be at the Cloud River battlefield, Liu Yi. What brings you here to our outpost? What do you want with us? You know Tan Xing? Is he a fellow member of the New Moon Sect? Liu Yi asked, his hand subtly finding the hilt of his blade, his voice a steely whisper. Tanley's brows furrowed warily upon those words, a contemplative air enveloping him. Indeed, he is my blood sibling. What do you want with him? Oh, so you're Tan Xing's real younger brother? Liu Yi's brows peaked with a flicker of surprise dancing in his eyes. What an unexpected revelation. I am. Most intriguing. Liu Yi inclined his head. Tan Xing extended me his care and hospitality when we met each other in the Cloud River battlefield. I came today to return the favor. Before the final syllable was even out of his lips, Liu Yi's figure blurred into a phantom-like silhouette surging forward like a tempest unleashed, aimed with unfaltering determination toward Tanley. Tanley had been harboring a semblance of caution, but he was ill-prepared for the suddenness of Liu Yi's attack. This was quite at odds with his expectations. He had surmised that Liu Yi, being a Cloud River Realm cultivator here in the Spirit Creek battlefield, would refrain from living up to the full extent of his reputation by indulging in reckless violence. The taste of having the judgment of heavens tormenting one's body and soul was not one easily endured. Liu Yi translating his threat into a real attack really was not what he expected. In the face of such an impending crisis, Tanley quickly conjured his weapon, a giant shield that drew upon his inner reservoir of spiritual power, interposing it before him. A colossal boom resounded through the air as the impact struck, threatening to drive Tanley into the ground. His eyes widened as a cocktail of astonishment and trepidation flooded his senses. What proved even more unsettling was the realization that the spiritual power glow that enveloped his shield had dimmed just after sustaining one blow, its essence chipping away. Tanley could not quite believe it. As a Heaven 9 cultivator and numbered among the 50th of the Spirit Creek battlefield's finest upon the roll of supremacy, there were few who would doubt his strength and prowess. Coming in here as a Cloud River Realm cultivator, Lu Yi's power had been dialed down to Heaven 9. Still, his attack was one that had nearly sundered his defenses. Never before had Tanli truly fought against Lu Yi before. Though cognizant of Lu Yi's prowess, he understood little about the latter's deadliness in battle, until this very instant. Brother Tan. Surrounding acolytes of the New Moon sect bore witness as Tanli was cast down by the tempestuous strike, their collective astonishment echoing in the air like a chorus of startled birds. Simultaneously, within the heart of the maelstrom of blurriness and danger, Tanli felt the resounding impact of another assault upon his once stalwart shield. A sonorous crash heralded the shattering of the protective relic, a formerly formidable defensive weapon bonded with non-opal enchantments. Tanli's visage contorted with a mixture of disbelief and panic. Swift as a coursing wind, Lu Yi caught up closely behind with inviolable arcing in a horizontal sweep. Stripped of his shield and dispossessed of the sanctuary it provided, Tanli's only recourse was to marshal the depths of his spiritual power and vital essence, conjuring a protective aura bristling over the surface of his flesh. Inviolable stroke drew blood. Tanli plummeted heavily to the earth, the echo of impact mingling with his anguished cry. A gaping wound cleaved his abdomen, so deep that it almost unveiled the morbid discombobulation of his entrails, an unsightly tableau of vulnerability. A shiver coursed down his spine. For once in his life, the specter of death loomed so near at his threshold. Were it not for his stalwart physical constitution as a body-tempering cultivator whose bodily defenses were fortified by unyielding tenacity, the rending strike would have cloven him into two bloody halves. In the meantime, Lu Yi found himself mildly astonished with a quiet exhalation of wonder escaping his lips. The resilience of a body-tempering cultivator really was starkly in contrast to the usual lot of cultivators adopting other disciplines. Lu Yi advanced upon his prey, poised to deliver a final blow before he was disrupted by the cacophonous symphony of howling air and whistling winds. Seeing their legate fall, the rest of the New Moon sect had decided to spring into action, unable to contain their tumultuous fervor. What fear they had for Lu Yi dissolved into irrelevance. What mattered was saving their leader, whatever the cost. For they were many, and fear for just a lone adversary seemed an awful absurdity. Colorful ribbons of arcane incantations screaming through the air intertwined with the radiant dance of flying weapons, converging from all directions on Lu Yi with unrelenting intent. Urged by the throes of necessity, Lu Yi found himself compelled to suppress the burgeoning urge for bloodshed. He gracefully maneuvered his form, evading the onslaught of attacks directed his way. In this tempestuous moment, a symphony of metallic resonance erupted from the scabbard at his waist, and with an almost ethereal flourish 9 resplendent flying weapons took flight. The scene unfolded into a disarray of chaos, as even more New Moon sect acolytes were roused into hastening towards the epicenter of turmoil from all other corners of the outpost. A medical cultivator hastened to Tan Li's side to inspect the extent of his injuries, tending to him with practiced hands. The legate of the New Moon sect outpost himself bellowed with a thunderous proclamation, "How dare you, Lu Yi? You're a Cloud River Realm cultivator. How dare you come in here and impose your martial superiority on us? Do you truly believe that we of the New Moon sect are afraid of you? I know. You must have suffered being attacked by my brother, that's why you're here. Do you expect to find grandeur from subduing lessers like us? How shameless you are." Tanli had expected as much when Lu Yi mentioned his elder brother earlier. The inquiry had stirred enough shadow of speculation for Tanli to guess most if not all of the truth accurately. Otherwise, why would the Annihilator of Sects come all the way here, of all places, to the New Moon sect's outpost? Accompanying the timbre of his wrathful retort, an anguished cry unexpectedly pierced the tumultuous air. Diverse in their ranks of cultivation, the New Moon sect defenders were a ragtag and variegated ensemble of inept lackeys when Lu Yi had enough experience of dealing with enemies that well outnumbered him. He had traversed enough perils on his journey that the crucible of such adversity no longer felt unfamiliar to him. Serpentine in his movement, Lu Yi relied on glyph protection while he maintained his own onslaught until a momentary lapse caught one of the New Moon sect acolytes off guard. With a vicious stroke of precision, Lu Yi's flying weapons descended upon him like a hawk finding prey, cutting him down with a macabre downpour in its wake. His fury unbridled, and enraged Tanli screamed, "You dare spill blood here?" Never in his wildest dreams could Tanli have fathomed that Lu Yi would dare incur the wrath of heaven's retribution by spilling blood here in the Spirit Creek battlefield. True enough, with a single life now extinguished on his account, a pulsating violet luminescence suffused Lu Yi's countenance. More than that, it actually was an assembly of amorphous violet arcs coursing through him. The corners of Lu Yi's twitched at the recognition of what it was, the judgment of the heavens. Painful. Very painful. He could recount an anthology of injuries, minor and grievous alike, with a few besetting him to the precipice of unconsciousness. However, never before had he tolerated any agony of this caliber. The judgment of the heavens wrought anguish not solely upon his physical body, but also on his very essence too. It was as if a legion of ants were gnawing ravenously upon his body and spirit, a feast that subjected him to a maelstrom of torment indescribable. Chapter 538. Not much longer. A Cloud River cultivator going back to the Spirit Creek battlefield to pick on his lessers was hardly Lu Yi's idea of something honorable. But if Tan Xing had triumphed over Lu Yi solely due to his own power and ability, Lu Yi could hardly fault him for that. The latter would have blamed himself and instead just focused on his own progress and development, to pave his way for future retribution. But Tan Xing's cunning use of the tracking disc's second function had rendered Lu Yi completely exposed, which later culminated in how he was cornered and surrounded by virtually every Thousand Demon Ridge cultivator in the Carnage Coliseum. If that did not happen, then he would not have used up the immensely valuable golden body token and his painstakingly gathered 100,000 contribution points. For this he blamed Tan Xing. Fully, and the tangled path of payback was what led Lu Yi to the doorstep of the New Moon sect. At the same time, it was also meant as a declaration, an unspoken challenge that since they failed to kill him, then the storm of his reprisal would be a tempest to reckon with. An aura of amethyst lightning enfolded Lu Yi at his first kill. Heaven's retribution had spared no time at all to punish him for that transgression, and the pain was a harrowing ordeal, an agony unparalleled. He had been anticipating how painful it would be prior to coming here. But clearly he had underestimated the torment. If the taking of a single life could be this painful, then what about killing tens or even hundreds of them? By Lu Yi's own reckoning, 5 or 6 lives, that must be his limit. Any more beyond that would kill him, or at least he would be paralyzed due to the intense agony. The New Moon sect outpost here might not have been garrisoned by too large a force, but Lu Yi estimated at least 100 or 200 men strong. But confronting such odds, if he could only kill just 5 or 6 of them, made his mission nigh impossible. A sudden anomaly rippled forth from inside his spiritual self and interrupted his thoughts. That was when the anguish that once gripped both his flesh and psyche dulled as if eased by an otherworldly touch. Lu Yi's heart quivered as he maintained his evasion, weaving around amidst the barrage of attacks raining on him, while part of him ventured into his spiritual self to investigate the source of this intriguing disturbance. With his inner sight, he beheld his tree of glyphs, now awash in a cascade of transcendental flames. The very tree seemed to have burst into an inferno, flames ascending in serpentine fervor, incinerating the oppressive shroud of ominous, ashen mist that was engulfing his essence. The amethyst lightning that coiled around his arms and limbs dissipated before his eyes. The tree of glyphs possessed the power to incinerate the judgment of the heavens. The unexpected revelation elicited a chorus of astonishment from Lu Yi. Upon introspection, however, the pieces fit. Everything made sense. The tree of glyphs had been proven adept at purifying any intruding elements detrimental to its host, the toxins from the ingestion of spirit pills, for example. It stood to reason then that given the requisite fuel, the tree's ethereal flames could render Lu Yi impervious to many forms of harm. The judgment of the heavens, although retribution ordained by a divine force beyond evasion, shared a similar nature with toxins, an element invasive to his being, harmful in nature. Thus, the tree of glyphs could incinerate the judgment of the heavens as well. However, the magnitude of incinerating the judgment of the heavens clearly eclipsed that of ordinary toxins, which would incur a greater cost in terms of spiritual fuel. In mere moments, a refreshing change swept over Lu Yi's form, a sensation akin to weightlessness pervading his being. The iridescent shroud of amethyst lightning bolts that once enveloped him now danced away, vanishing like mist. He had reservations initially about excessive bloodshed because of the judgment of the heavens. Therefore, his original intention had been to eliminate only a select few to intimidate the rest of the New Moon sect into submission. But now that he discovered that the Tree of Glyphs could vanquish even the judgment of the heavens, such apprehensions had now dissolved into nothingness. All 9 flying weapons flowed and interwove with renewed deadliness augmented by glyphs, eclipsing the performance witnessed mere moments before. Another chorus of anguished cries pierced the air with more slain enemies spilling blood as they plummeted from the air. The fading amethyst lightning once again enshrouded Lu Yi, its luminescent presence snaking all around him. A still heavily injured Tan Li was screaming at the top of his voice, "Do you have a death wish, Lu Yi? How dare you?" Seeing his men being cut down right before his very eyes was a painful loss, but if Lu Yi were to go on killing like this, the latter would just be digging his own grave. The deaths of the defenders would have been worth it if Lu Yi were to die, assuming he did not escape. With that in mind, Tan Li roared to his men, "Don't let him escape. The judgment is killing him." The New Moon Sect cultivators were panicking and balking at Lu Yi being able to so easily slay them despite the superiority of numbers. None of them would dare to gamble away their own life, especially seeing how brutal and savage Lu Yi was. But witnessing the burgeoning intensity of the amethyst lightning enveloping Lu Yi and hearing the rousing command of their legate Tan Li reignited their valor. With the radiant dance of his flying weapons and the cascading glimmers of inviolable slicing at every enemy around him, Lu Yi weaved through the adversarial throng with the grace of a butterfly. Wherever his presence touched, torrents of violence erupted, painting the surroundings with an unsettling hue of carnage and turmoil. The silhouettes of slain New Moon Sect acolytes tumbled to the ground like autumn leaves, their final descent a poignant dance of surrender to death. Even Lu Yi found it arduous to repel every enemy attack as a lone invader contending against an entire sect. Fortunately, there was glyph protection to shield his vulnerabilities, causing any blows that struck him to at most inflict superficial wounds. More so, with his remarkable physique that rivaled even the stoutest body-tempering cultivators of the same cultivation rank. But at the same time, for anyone who took a blow from Lu Yi, it wouldn't be a matter of mere injury, it would be a question of life or death. Acolyte after acolyte fell in battle, and Lu Yi was a violet bolt of lightning of death, zigzagging through the expanse with piles of dead in his wake. Finally, one of them broke under the mounting strain and cried out, "Brother Tan! There's no way we'll defeat him." The entire outpost would have scoffed with disbelief at the notion of a single individual being able to face off against the full complement of an outpost's defenses alone. Yet, at this very moment, this inexplicable phenomenon was taking place right before their very eyes. And to think that the individual in question would be none other than the Annihilator of Sects, Lu Yi himself, now wreaking havoc and carnage despite being afflicted by the judgment of the heavens. Tan Li's gaze reddened with bloodshot intensity as he witnessed his fellow acolytes falling one after another, the heartache within him growing unbearably suffocating. But they had come this far. To recall his men and concede their losses would be nothing but condemning all the deaths and sacrifices into vain and needless futility. The violet lightning enveloping Lu Yi's form had grown so concentrated it became an indissoluble maelstrom. Surely the Annihilator of Sects himself must be enduring unimaginable torment and anguish himself? He cannot withstand the judgment much longer. We must hold on. Roared Tan Li. Lu Yi's resilience had all but surpassed his expectations. Tan Li had initially assumed that Lu Yi could at most claim a few lives, yet up until now the toll exacted by the savage craft and hands of the Annihilator of Sects had surged to nearly 30. In one fell swoop, more than 2/10 of the outpost's less than 200-man strong force were killed, such a grievous toll. Tan Li dreaded how he would explain the losses to the leadership of the sect if he failed to apprehend Lu Yi here. In the meantime, the rest of the outpost's defenders gritted their teeth with resolve at the command of their legate, maintaining their assault on Lu Yi head-on despite the trepidation weighing on them. Nevertheless, Lu Yi looked hardly encumbered by the pain of the judgment of the heavens. On the contrary, he grew bolder with each enemy he slew. At every swing of his weapon, men would drop dead on the ground. The medical cultivator tending to Tan Li's wound broke his silence all of a sudden. "I've heard about the Battle of Golden Tip, Brother Tan Li. There was this true Lake Realm cultivator of the Crimson Blood sect who entered this battlefield back then, and in that battle, she alone killed many dozens of our people." Tan Li swiftly turned his head, his pupils suffused with crimson intensity. "What are you trying to say?" The medical cultivator continued, "I am not sure of the effects of the judgment of the heavens, but it is said that not even a divine ocean realm cultivator could withstand its punitive torment. By all rights, Lu Yi should have long been incapacitated by now. Yet even with the judgment gnawing on him, he doesn't seem to be affected much. Does that suggest that the Crimson Blood sect have some unknown methods that allow them to evade the effects of the judgment? Impossible. Tan Li dismissed flatly, this is the punishment inflicted by the heavens. It's impervious to any mortal manipulation. But, what if there really is some way to do just that? Tan Li's expression drifted into a momentary trance. Indeed, what if there really is some sort of trick for that? So many had died and so long had elapsed, yet Lu Yi looked fine. If he really was being subjected to the agony of the judgment of the heavens, then the pain should have been enough to reduce him to full paralysis because of the pain, if not outright death. There was Lu Yi, the paragon of death and destruction now, defying the ravages of the judgment with an eerie calmness that betrayed no hint of pain or distress. Could it be true that the Crimson Blood sect does indeed possess some arcane methods to elude the retribution of the heavens themselves? If that were true, then that would indeed be a perplexing enigma of the highest order. The heavens have always been an arbiter of impartiality. Yet why would it seem to favor the Crimson Blood sect so much? Sir, implored the medical cultivator, his words flowing with concern, it might be imprudent to wager the lives of our men just to ascertain this enigma. Tan Li jerked himself back into focus. His men, his comrades and his fellow acolytes, were all charging at Lu Yi, not because they believed they could defeat the latter, but rather, in the belief of his assertion that Lu Yi would eventually crumble under the strain of the judgment of the heavens. But if Lu Yi could indeed emerge from the torment of the judgment of the heavens unscathed, then all the deaths of his men would be for nothing. Conviction crystallized within Tan Li's mind. He leaped to his feet, roaring with unshakable determination, "Sound the retreat! Back to Jianghu!" His decree thundered, impelling the defenders to back off Lu Yi and began filing straight for the outpost Sanctum of Providence. Even they had begun to notice that Lu Yi wasn't affected by the judgment of heavens. Lu Yi was about to chase after them, but Tan Li's towering form materialized in a collision course with him, screaming, "Your opponent is me, Lu Yi. Let them be." A maelstrom of spiritual power and vital essence surged within Tan Li's being, infusing his very form with an unnatural hue of crimson, emanating a primal and bestial aura resembling that of a rampaging beast, an untamable force of nature both formidable and insolent. Lu Yi remained steadfast, his stance resolute as he lifted inviolable, its gleaming edge cleaving through the air in a sequence of 3 lightning-quick strokes. 3 crescent-like arcs of ethereal radiance bore down upon Tan Li, who met the onslaught with arms outstretched in staunch resistance. The resonant echoes of impact reverberated, and grievous wounds so terrible that one could almost see the white of his bones peeking out of the grotesque flesh marred his forearms. His impetuous charge was halted in its tracks. Before he even came to his senses, a shadow shrouded in violet blotted his sight of everything else. A blinding dance of gleaming steel ensued, and Tan Li froze as if suspended in time. Lu Yi deftly swept past the petrified form of Tan Li, in hot pursuit of the rest of the New Moon sect, cutting down anyone within his line of sight and leaving a trail of blood and dead bodies leading to the outpost Sanctum of Providence. Behind him, stultified despair enshrouded Tan Li's gaze as life ebbed from him. His once formidable form crashed to the ground with his head rolling off his shoulder even before he hit the earth. Despite being equal in rank with Lu Yi, he could not even withstand one round of attacks from the latter. With the dust of battle now finally settling, Lu Yi stood alone in the Sanctum of Providence. He flicked the bloodstains from inviolable before returning it to its scabbard. Most of the New Moon sect outpost had been evacuated. Lu Yi came alone and there was only so much he could do. But given the circumstances, the outcome had turned out to be acceptable. Lu Yi stepped out of the Sanctum of Providence and approached the headless corpse of Tan Li. His hand rummaged around, fumbling for a brief moment before extracting the control gem of the defensive ward. He destroyed it and with it, the defensive ward that guarded the outpost faded. Only then did he convey a message to Yi to bring forth Tao Jianghu. Chapter 539 All That for Nothing. When Tao Jianghu and Yi rendezvoused with Lu Yi at the New Moon sect outpost, little did they realize that they would be beholding a scene that would be etched into the fabric of his memory for the rest of his lifetime. Corpse after gruesome corpse lay scattered upon the blood-spattered flagstones on the floor, their positions twisted and chaotic. The blood stains on the ground painted a macabre canvas that depicted how savage was the earlier skirmish, a morbid trail of red and dismembered limbs that led straight to the forecourt of the New Moon sect's Sanctum of Providence. Upon the steps of the Sanctum of Providence was a solitary figure sitting there, leaning in a casual recline with an air of nonchalance and a saber lying beside him. A serpent of violet lightning was slithering all over him, crackling in its serpentine dance. Watching how the amethyst lightning was gnawing at the physique of the person gave Tao Jianghu a disconcerting discomfort. It was nigh impossible to fathom the torment one would endure within the embrace of such a thunderous hue. Beyond the shadow of the sanctum's edifice, deep inside its recesses, a miasma of crimson malevolence hung heavy, where no less than a score of lifeless corpses lay amassed. The New Moon Sect outpost sat right inside the core regions of the battlefield, a place where every cultivator was at least a ninth order if not higher. Yet, these practitioners who once held dominion over heights, in Tao Jianghu's eyes, now lay dead within the pool of their own blood, their warmth steadily fading. Tao Jianghu could have sworn that he counted at least 50 dead bodies. When his eyes set upon the person seated upon the steps, Tao Jianghu was overcome by such a crippling sensation as if he was gazing upon a towering mountain summit that stretched beyond the clouds overhead, a height that he would never ever be able to scale. This was Lu Yi, the fifth acolyte of the Crimson Blood sect, his senior brother. Months ago, he had made history when he single-handedly tamed every Thousand Demon Ridge sect and order through his savage might. It wasn't until he ascended into the Cloud River realm that they rejoiced and celebrated with unbridled elation. But who would have guessed that the most feared annihilator of sects would revisit the Spirit Creek battlefield after just a 3-month absence, only to lay waste to the outpost of a major Thousand Demon Ridge sect. Tao Jianghu climbed the steps and greeted, "Brother Lu Yi." "Go," motioned Lu Yi, "go inside and do your thing." "Yes, sir," answered Tao Jianghu, knowing full well why he was brought here. He stepped inside the Sanctum of Providence and with his credentials as legate of the Crimson Blood sect outpost, he stripped the Divine Opportunity column of the New Moon Sect outpost of all its blessings. This was his first time, but it wasn't hard. All it took were a couple of tries and Tao Jianghu easily got the hang of it. Yi placed before Lu Yi the storage bags she had gathered from the dead bodies she had ransacked. With a worrisome tone she asked, "Are you all right, Lu Yi?" The judgment of the heavens was anathema to the human soul, and spiritual entities like Yi would find themselves affected greatly just by being near it. Even a glance was enough to induce a sense of vertigo in her. "I am fine," Lu Yi responded casually. With the tree of glyphs consuming the invasive judgment of the heavens, he felt rather well. Even the pain felt relatively tolerable. If anything, he was more bothered by the loss of his contribution points, which was a 2,000-point deficit. The heavens' rewarding of contribution points clearly took him for a Cloud River Realm Third Order, even though his rank would remain at the Heaven 9 stage for as long as he stayed here in the Spirit Creek battlefield. And as a Cloud River Realm cultivator, every kill would not win him points, but rather a deduction of his contribution points. What a huge loss it had been. He had come here seeking remediations for the losses he had sustained, but instead of gaining points, he was losing more points. But he had collected enough loot and storage bags from the enemies he had slain to make up for the deficit. Lu Yi stuffed a few spirit pills into his mouth to recuperate while he took the time to undo the magical seals that held the storage bags. Nevertheless, there was little to be expected of the loot he had collected from cultivators who were still of the Spirit Creek realm. Even Tan Li's, a Heaven 9 cultivator, hardly fared better. Lu Yi finally finished undoing the magical seals of his booty. That took approximately half an hour, revealing nothing that might have dazzled him nor stirred his heart. Tao Jianghu, having deftly purloined every blessing he could get his hands on from the New Moon Sect's Divine Opportunity column, emerged from the Sanctum of Providence with an air of invigoration. He strode towards Lu Yi and asked, "Where to after this, Brother Lu?" Lu Yi carefully stowed away his plunder, not forgetting to stuff a few spirit pills and stones into a separate storage bag which he tossed to Tao Jianghu, saying, "Gimme a minute." He spun on his heels and headed into the Sanctum of Providence, whereupon he reached the foot of the Divine Opportunity column. He extended a hand and touched the Divine Obelisk, and entered the Vault of Providence, selling his loot there in exchange for contribution points. That brought his contribution points tally up to 7,000. Without the faintest hint of hesitation, he proceeded to convert all accrued points into buying flames of earth and spirits. The reason was simple enough. The tree of glyph appeared to have been fully drained of its fuel and swift replenishment was imperative. Or else, the judgment of the heavens would go on inflicting its damage on him, which could encumber his plans. The consumption of the tree of glyph's fuel in eradicating the effects of the judgment of the heavens far exceeded that of venomous toxins. Whether there was still enough fuel for the tree or not, Lu Yi did not know. But what he did know was that a small portion of the sustenance for the tree was always stockpiled as reserve whenever the tree was to unlock new glyphs. The only time when the tree of glyph had fully run out of sustenance was during the Battle of Golden Tip. He was still a very lowly Spirit Creek realm cultivator at the time, and he did not have enough contribution points, which was how the tree's sustenance became fully expended at the time. But since he began acquiring flames of earthen spirits from the Vault of Providence, his tree of glyphs was never short of sustenance. Until now, which was the second time this happened. The tree of glyphs devoured one flame of earthen spirits after another like a starving wolf as the vast expanses of smoky ash ignited billowed. Still, the violet thunderbolts crackling all over him showed no sign of diminishing. Over 50 lives had been taken by him, and in the aftermath, the growing effect of the judgment of the heavens because of their deaths was poised to take a lot of flames of earthen spirits to fully eradicate. But what astonished Lu Yi the most was how the tree of glyphs refused to exhibit any reaction no matter how many flames of earthen spirits he had consumed. He could only surmise that the tree must have perceived his precarious circumstance and was focusing on removing the judgment's effects above all else. With himself now beleaguered by the judgment's effects, the flames were clearly being used by the tree as fuel to combat the judgment's effects, not to unlock any more new glyphs. In mere moments, the flames he exchanged from the Vault of Providence for over 7,000 contribution points were fully consumed, the boughs of the tree of glyphs now shrouded by an unceasingly thick smog that refused to dissipate. A brief half-hour later, the tree of glyphs lay dormant, its leaves unmoving, and its reservoir of fuel once more completely depleted. Still, the arcing electricity of the judgment of heavens persisted in its vibrant shade of purple upon Lu Yi, its vigor undiminished. All that for nothing. What a loss. A flicker danced at the corner of Lu Ye's eye, a telltale sign of his inner turmoil. His initial plan to seek restitution from the New Moon sect for the losses he had sustained at first had ended up with even more contribution points bleeding away. Instead, with every kill he took in trying to eradicate the judgment of the heavens had cost him a huge load of points too. Instead of regaining points, the hole was only just getting bigger and bigger, much to his dismay. But if he were to take into account the blessing Tao Jianghu reaped from the enemy outpost, the balance undoubtedly swayed in favor of profit. Nevertheless, being a Cloud River realm cultivator, any good for the outpost here was no longer relevant to him. The blessings Tao Jianghu plundered would be good for the rest of the outpost and not him, not even a modicum of benefit at all for him. Lu Yi delved into the confines of his storage sphere once more. He had amassed a considerable trove of spoils since he entered the Cloud River battlefield, and he had not been able to find time to sort everything out. His original intention had been to go through the massive heaps of booty the next time he visited a Divine Trade Association branch. But no time for that now. He was in dire need of contribution points. Once again he re-entered the Vault of Providence, where he sifted through every item and sold everything that was useless, keeping only some spirit pills and stones that could be useful in the future. That at least brought in a haul of over 10,000 contribution points, enough for him to purchase more flames of earthen spirits to be used as fuel for the Tree of Glyphs. Amidst his preoccupations in his work, a solitary piece of news took flight within the real world of Jianghu, spreading with alacrity as it reached every major order and sect within the Thousand Demon Ridge Coalition. After just 3 months, the Annihilator of Sects Lu Yi had resurfaced in the Spirit Creek battlefield once more. As if his re-emergence was not bad enough, the harbinger of terror for all Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators here had made a beeline for the outpost of the New Moon sect, which he conquered single-handedly. In the aftermath, the outpost was laid to waste with more than 50 dead or maimed, including the legate Tanli, who was found later with his head unceremoniously lopped off. The news took the entire Thousand Demon Ridge coalition by storm. Many, especially those of the New Moon sect, uttered the name Lu Yi with disgust and rage, believing that Lu Yi did not belong here in the Spirit Creek battlefield, much less oppressing cultivators lesser than him. If only they could enter the Spirit Creek battlefield and challenge Lu Yi themselves, thought the true Lake and Divine Ocean realm elites of the Thousand Demon Ridge. But yowling expletives and curses was pretty much all they could do. None of them truly had the courage to take on Lu Yez in the Spirit Creek battlefield. All it would take was one single loss against Lu Yi and they would become the subject of mockery throughout the entire battlefield. At any rate, the enormous losses suffered by the New Moon sect, the deaths of its younger crop of cultivators, the sacking of its outpost, and also the plunder of its blessings, would not be redressed by just rebuilding the outpost alone. Back when Louis Yi had demanded all Thousand Demon Ridge outposts for payment in return for not attacking them, the New Moon Sect outpost had offered up their riches as well in its bid to sue for peace. Yet why did Louis Yi come back here wreaking havoc after receiving payment? The high echelons of the Crescent Moon Sect assembled all surviving members of the outpost at once, seeking to unravel the motive of Louis Yi's sudden invasion. Soon, a vital thread emerged: the mention of Tan Sheng by Louis Yi during the invasion earlier. The latter had been claiming how he wanted to repay Tan Sheng's kindness to him during their encounter at the Cloud River battlefield. Yet, beneath this veneer laid irony. One could barely expect any kindness between Tan Sheng and Louis Yi, if they were to encounter each other, since they both belonged to two opposing factions. But that was enough for the leadership of the New Moon Sect to guess that the clue of Louis Yi's sudden hostility must lie with Tan Sheng. To that end, they immediately ordered men to enter the Cloud River battlefield to reach out for more information. News poured in swiftly enough. Apparently, during the last occurrence of the Carnage Coliseum phenomenon in the Cloud River battlefield, both Tan Sheng and Louis Yi were caught inside it, and in his bid to win the first place in the Carnage roster, Tan Sheng had employed the use of a tracking disc. That culminated in an all-out manhunt by almost every Thousand Demon Ridge elite in the Carnage Coliseum that nearly sealed Louis Yi's demise. That forced Louis Yi into using a precious gold body token and the costly summoning of a divine opportunity column right after the Coliseum ended to narrowly elude his doom. A gold body token, a magical item of immense and incredible rarity, and a divine opportunity column that would take 100,000 contribution points to summon. That finally impressed upon the New Moon Sect about Louis Yi's motive, a clear act of retribution. If anything, the sect only had Tan Sheng's failure to decisively put Louis Yi to death once and for all to blame. A mistake that clearly had sowed the seeds of peril back then. It did not take long for the rest of the Thousand Demon Ridge to realize what just happened and why. Word of what took place inside the Carnage Coliseum spread swiftly. All of the Thousand Demon Ridge could only marvel in awe at Louis Yi's stupendous fortune for finding such a coveted treasure in the gold body token. Without it, there was no way that Louis Yi could have survived such impossible odds back then. Judging from the timing, Louis Yi appeared to have re-entered the Spirit Creek battlefield right after leaving the Cloud River battlefield, an unequivocal embodiment of unrelenting vendetta, taken to the extreme. Chapter 540 next. But the rest of the Thousand Demon Ridge couldn't care less about the aftermath of the attack and the New Moon Sect's indignation. If anything, they were more concerned about Louis Yi's present condition. His return to the Spirit Creek battlefield and subsequent conquering of an enemy outpost might sound like the sort of daring do that could someday be written into some glorious paean, but Louis Yi was a Cloud River realm cultivator nonetheless, and the Heaven's retribution had and always been merciless and unyielding. And in the midst of this turmoil, Louis Yi had claimed over 50 lives, although it was rumored that once the relentless slaughter ended, the purple lightning coiling around him seemed to have materialized enough that it looked very real. It was so real that it looked incredibly dangerous and ominous. But if the destructive force of the judgment of the heavens was truly so fearsome, surely that would mean the demise of Louis Yi? If such were the case, the New Moon Sect could at least bask in the glory of their accomplishment, in spite of the magnitude of their losses. The unrest Louis Yi had sown caused enough unrest in the Spirit Creek battlefield for every Thousand Demon Ridge cultivator to feel panic and terrified at the mere mention of his name. Yet even when he had gone into the Cloud River battlefield, he miraculously eluded the grasp of enemies far more powerful and deadlier than him, despite his relatively low cultivation rank there. That illustrated one truth: if such talent were to be allowed to mature, then Louis Yi would undoubtedly spell disaster for all of the Thousand Demon Ridge in the future. But if the judgment of the heavens could kill him, then this would be a cause for celebration for them all. Multitudes of messages were dispatched to the New Moon Sect, beseeching them to send some men into the Spirit Creek battlefield to ascertain Louis Yi's fate. Everyone needed to know whether he lived or perished. But the New Moon Sect responded with a firm refusal, finding the messages nothing but unfounded requests. Sending anyone back to the New Moon Sect outpost, where Louis Yi might still be present, would be extremely dangerous. The sect couldn't afford to risk more lives just to accommodate the requests of bystanders who had nothing to lose. During the Carnage Coliseum, Tan Sheng was not the only enemy cultivator who had given Louis Yi enough hell to want payback. However, the origins of the conflict undeniably traced back to him. Now that their outpost had been overrun and the acolytes there slain, the New Moon Sect could do nothing else but acknowledge their involvement in the offense. Yet, given Louis Yi's unstoppable and enraged rampage, his thirst for vengeance surely extended beyond the New Moon sect. Each and every Thousand Demon Ridge sect and order that stood behind the elite cultivators who were part in Liu Ye's torment during the Carnage Colosseum had to answer for their involvement. None would escape this reckoning. This revelation sent tremors through the hearts of many Thousand Demon Ridge sections. They hastily dispatched acolytes into the Cloud River battlefield to gather intelligence, wanting to find out who was amongst those who had participated in the attack on Liu Yi, and whether the throng included any of their own. However, communication between the Cloud River battlefield and the real world of Jianghu was not as convenient as that of the Spirit Creek battlefield, rendering much of the information elusive. The duration of the wait for confirmed news remained uncertain. Furthermore, Liu Yi was undoubtedly in trouble due to the judgment of the heavens. Even if he survived, he would likely lack the strength to launch any more attacks. To that end, the leadership of the other Thousand Demon Ridge sects and orders believed that the situation may not be as dire as the New Moon sect's report suggested. Nevertheless, it was imperative to ascertain Liu Yi's status. Such matters could not be taken lightly. Hence, some of the Thousand Demon Ridge outposts near the New Moon sect promptly dispatched men to investigate the situation. In the meantime, somewhere within the Cloud River battlefield, Tan Xing, clad in azure robes, was grieving with tears from eyes scarlet from his rage rolling down his cheeks. He had just received word from his order's stronghold in Jianghu, informing him of the events in the Spirit Creek battlefield. Tan Xing clasped his fists tightly, silently vowing to himself that he would not rest until he had confronted Liu Yi, a solemn pledge he intended to fulfill in this lifetime. From his perspective, targeting Liu Yi during the Carnage Colosseum was not a misjudgment. His mistake lay in failing to exterminate Liu Yi once and for all, allowing him to slip through his fingers. What's even more unfathomable was that Liu Yi would brazenly slip back inside the Spirit Creek battlefield to exact revenge, leading to the tragic deaths of his own junior acolytes, including his blood sibling at the hands of Liu Yi. If their prior interactions had merely been a clash of factions, this has now intensified into a real vendetta. A blood feud that demanded retribution. At the Ninth Order of the Cloud River realm, and after gaining considerable advantages from his adventures in the Carnage Colosseum, Tan Xing's initial plan was to advance into the True Lake realm within a month. However, given the current circumstances, his ascension would be meaningless without avenging his fellow acolytes of the New Moon sect. In the face of this deep-seated bitterness and rancor, he pledged to exhaust every resource in his quest to slay Liu Yi first. Back inside the Spirit Creek battlefield, Liu Yi was lounging casually on the steps leading into the New Moon sect outpost Sanctum of Providence. The purple lightning bolts that once snaked all around him had mostly dissipated. Right now he was responding to messages sent to him by several close allies. Word about his return had somehow spread, and many within the Spirit Creek battlefield were now aware of his presence here and his successful invasion of the New Moon sect outpost. Filled with a sudden spurt of zeal and enthusiasm, the legates and prolgates of various allied sects and orders were reaching out to him, inquiring if he needed assistance. Liu Yi harked back to the time when he was leading a crusade of Grand Sky Coalition allies that not only laid waste to a number of enemy outposts but also brought those who were part of the crusade substantial gains. Such conveniences were no more since many of his allies had entered the inner circle areas of the Spirit Creek battlefield themselves during his ascension into the Cloud River realm. Now, with his return, many were becoming restless, yearning for an encore. Some were concerned about his well-being, given his significant body count and the damage caused by the judgment of the heavens. Liu Yi responded to each message one by one, which took quite some time to address them all. But to Liu Yi, if members of the Grand Sky Coalition were concerned about his condition, it was likely that the Thousand Demon Ridge would be even more interested to know how he was at the moment, although there was no way to predict how they would react once they confirmed that he was still all and well. From a personal perspective, the assault on the New Moon sect's outpost had been costly, with nearly 20,000 contribution points invested in the endeavor. But the Crimson Blood sect had undoubtedly profited from the successful invasion. Just the blessings that Tao Jianghu had stripped from the enemy outpost already worth more than 2,000 contribution points. Nevertheless, leaving aside the merits reaped from their spoils, the primary satisfaction came from venting pent-up frustration. Lifting up his weapon, Liu Yi beckoned at Tao Jianghu, who had been waiting with the patience and obedience comparable to that of a butler. "Let's go. On to the next one." Back then he was besieged by so many enemy cultivators that it was impossible for him to possibly know which Thousand Demon Ridge sect or order were all of his assailants from. All he could remember were the New Moon sect and the Clouded Sun clan, where Tan Sheng and Wei Ke were from respectively. Tan Sheng was the source of the whole debacle, which is why Lu Yi chose to attack the New Moon sect first. Meanwhile, Wei Ke was the biggest instigator and the fiercest nemesis on his tail all the time. So he was placed second. But Lu Yi couldn't kill as many people as he did at the New Moon sect outpost anymore. He had already sold off all his spoils of war, and still, his reserves of fuel for the Tree of Glyph were running low. Nevertheless, Lu Yi believed that there was a good chance that the Clouded Sun clan would make a wise decision to not step into the same shoes as the New Moon sect. As for the others, it didn't matter which sect or order they came from. Of all the 1,000 Demon Ridge sects and orders with outposts in the central regions of the Spirit Creek battlefield, Lu Yi would just treat them the same. With the precedent last time, Lu Yi had a good feeling that they would know what to do to prevent his wrath. Anyone who refused to submit to his demands for protection money, Lu Yi would be more than happy to make examples out of them, just like the New Moon sect. As for the notion of conquering every single 1,000 Demon Ridge outpost in the battlefield, Lu Yi would not go that far yet. He did not try something as drastic as that back when he was still the most powerful cultivator here at the Heaven 9 stage, hence there was no reason to do it now. With their outposts razed to the ground, the surviving enemy cultivators would find themselves without shelter. The gravity of the situation would have been less dire if this affected only a couple of 1,000 Demon Ridge factions. However, if all the 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivators in the central regions of the battlefield were to simultaneously lose their outposts, the situation would spiral out of control. With nothing to lose, the surviving enemy cultivators could band as one and form a force potent enough to go on a rampage of their own, systematically assaulting every Grand Sky Coalition outpost they encounter, one by one. Therefore, while Lu Yi undoubtedly possessed the means to rid the battlefield of any 1,000 Demon Ridge outpost, he absolutely must refrain from doing just that, for doing so would only bring boundless calamity to the rest of the Grand Sky Coalition members within the battlefield. There had been an order that had endured in the Spirit Creek battlefield for so long, a balance that if broken or disrupted, would only bring more harm than good. In contrast to notions that would only grant fleeting gratification, Lu Yi was more inclined to secure tangible gains by treading with careful deliberation. He consulted his map and discovered that the Clouded Sun clan outpost was unexpectedly nearer to the New Moon sect than he expected. With his speed he could reach it in less than half a day. Lu Yi rode on his magical conveyance. He took into the air, just in time to see ribbons of streaking flashes appearing on the horizon. That must be cultivators approaching, although he could not yet tell if they were friend or foe. And from the looks of things they appeared to have spotted him. Yet they continued their approach, their greater seemingly washing away any wariness or apprehension towards his presence. At a distance of over 10 miles away, the group continued to fly, exchanging words as they traveled across the air. Surely that's not Lu Yi, Brother Miao? That fellow seems to be coming from the direction of the New Moon sect's outpost, said one of them. Don't overthink it, responded the one the approaching cultivators referred to as Brother Miao. Lu Yi is here inside the Spirit Creek battlefield as a Cloud River Realm cultivator. After killing so many, he must be afflicted by the judgment of heavens by now. That stranger bears not a trace of any purplish lightning. I don't think that's Lu Yi, he must be just a passerby. True, the other nodded in agreement. We're approaching the New Moon sect's outpost. Stay vigilant, everyone. Cautioned Brother Miao, issuing a solemn command. Lu Yi is a ruthless killer and a formidable adversary of all 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivators. Our mission is solely to gather intelligence, not engage him in combat. If anything happens, withdraw at once. This is not a time to worry about face. Yes, sir, they all replied in unison. They were under orders from the leadership of their sect to come to the New Moon sect's outpost to investigate Lu Ye's situation, and none of them were expecting to meet face-to-face with the very quarry they had been charged to surveil. With the substantial distance still between them, there was no way they could recognize him either. It wasn't until they were less than 3 miles apart that Miao furrowed his brow as he scrutinized the incoming stranger. With them moving as a group, they saw no need to veer away. Yet despite being outnumbered, the stranger did not choose to alter his course as well, much to Miao's surprise. It was common for the side with weaker strength or lesser number to avoid potential confrontation whenever cultivators encountered each other in the wilderness without prior knowledge of each other's allegiances. That was why Miao was incredulous as to the stranger's boldness. He lifted his gaze and carefully observed. That was when his figure turned petrified as if suspended in mid-air. For 1 second, Miao nearly thought that his senses were deceiving him. But it was true. He looked again and there it was, their intended target for this reconnaissance mission, Liu Yi himself. Shocked he cried, "Impossible." As he had said earlier, Liu Yi had killed so many people that even if he survived, he would undoubtedly be afflicted by the judgment of heavens. He could barely fathom the possibility that the stranger approaching them could be Liu Yi himself. And there was no sign of any purplish electric bolts enveloping his body. It was as if the killings that he had committed here in the Spirit Creek battlefield had gone unpunished. That would have compelled Miao into thinking that he must be mistaken. This must be just someone else whose appearance resembled Liu Yi. Yet what about the presence of that small snow-white feline perching on his shoulder? Who else could it be if not Liu Yi? Plus, he clearly was coming from the direction of the New Moon Sect outpost. The distance between them had now fallen to just 2 miles. Chapter 541 Old Rules? Run! Senior brother Miao shouted as his thoughts raced. His few junior brothers and sisters looked puzzled. The person who had just spoken prior asked tentatively, "Senior brother Miao?" "That's Yi. Run." Senior brother Miao summoned his spirit artifact as he spoke, assuming a defensive posture. It was clear that he intended to stay behind and buy time for his junior brothers and sisters so they could escape. One had to admit that as a senior brother he was truly quite responsible. Their faces turned pale at the mention of that name and for a while, they were at a loss for what to do. It was just a man's name, yet its shadow was as tall as that of a tree. Liu Yi was relatively unknown in the Cloud River battlefield, but in the Spirit Creek battlefield, it would not be an exaggeration to say that everyone knew him. Especially after the astonishing feat he accomplished at the New Moon Sects outpost, where he single-handedly broke through the defenses of a Core Circle Sects outpost and slew over 50 people. Such remarkable achievements would leave a great impact on anyone. Who would have thought that they would encounter this plague when they came to the New Moon Sects outpost to gather information? In their brief hesitation, it was already too late to escape. Yi's figure was already less than 1,000 meters away. "Watch for my eye signals," Senior brother Miao shouted while circulating his spiritual power. The others also felt a sense of imminent danger and hurriedly brought out their spirit artifacts, standing behind senior brother Miao as if to back him up. A short while later, Liu Yi flew past them at a distance of less than 300 meters, heading straight ahead. Senior brother Miao and the others stiffened in midair, their expressions tense as sweat rolled down their foreheads. It wasn't until Liu Yi went far away that they could finally breathe a sigh of relief. They thought that they were doomed just now, but unexpectedly, Yi left just like that. Did he not see them? Of course that was impossible. They were less than 300 meters away, and Yi wasn't blind, so how could he not have seen them? In that case he must have simply chosen to ignore them. The rest were fine, relieved at having escaped from death, each celebrating their good fortune. Only senior brother Miao felt ashamed on top of that relief. He was glad that Yi didn't attack them or they would all have died, but he also felt ashamed for even feeling relieved at that. Yi was now in Heaven 9 just like him. Though he had the courage to fight Yi in the same realm, he didn't have the confidence to win against him. To think that he also ranked in the top 50 on the roll of supremacy. Senior brother Miao, one of his junior sisters called out in a trembling voice, "He's coming back." Senior brother Miao turned quickly and there Liu Yi was indeed. He who should have been flying away was now turning back. So was he still going to attack them? Senior brother Miao made up his mind. Even if he had to die in battle today, he had to let this Annihilator of Sects know that cultivators from Thousand Demon Ridge were not to be trifled with. The flying spirit artifacts stopped at a distance of less than 1/3 of a kilometer from them, which was the limit that a Heaven 9 cultivator could attack. "Are you from Thousand Demon Ridge?" Liu Yi asked. Panicking, senior brother Miao almost released his weapon in response, but after coming to his senses, he nodded solemnly. The man standing in front of him didn't feel like someone on the same level as him but rather a powerful real lake or divine ocean realm cultivator. His shame intensified. Facing Yi, he found that he didn't have the determination he had imagined. He didn't even have the courage to refuse to answer. "Since you seem to know who I am, I won't waste any time. Don't be nervous, I'm not feeling the urge to kill today, so I won't do anything to you." Mainly, killing would be too wasteful. Previously, killing enemies in the Spirit Creek battlefield earned him contributions, but now, not only would he lose contributions for killing, he would even have to spend contributions to buy some flames of earthen spirits to burn the judgment of the heavens. This statement left the eyes of the group twitching. He had just destroyed the New Moon Sect's outpost and killed over 50 people. He called that not having the urge to kill? What do you want? Senior Brother Miao steeled himself and asked. Go back and pass on a message to the major sects of Thousand Demon Ridge. Old rules. Skysword Peak in 10 days. If I don't get what I want within 10 days, I'll knock on each door one by one to pay you all a visit. With that, Lu Yi turned and left, leaving Senior Brother Miao and the others behind with uncertain expressions. It wasn't until Lu Ye's figure disappeared that someone asked, Senior Brother Miao, what does he mean? Senior Brother Miao did not answer. Naturally, he knew what Yi meant. After all, the same thing happened only a few months ago. At that time, the major core circle sects of Thousand Demon Ridge were unwilling to cooperate. After all, who would be willing to give away so many resources for no reason, and to one's enemies at that? But following Ye's battle against an elite-level spirit beast, achieving the status of an elite-level existence as a mere Spirit Creek realm cultivator, the sects that were unwilling to cooperate had no choice but to comply. When one's fist was smaller than another's, and with many previous examples laid out before oneself, what else could one do but cooperate? Compared to the resources they had to give out, the losses they would incur by having their outposts destroyed were unimaginable. Let's go. Senior Brother Miao called out and quickly led the group towards their own outpost. He had to pass on the news quickly. As for the rest, it was not something he, a Spirit Creek realm cultivator, could consider. The experts of the sect would handle it. In less than 2 hours, Lu Ye's request was brought forward by Senior Brother Miao and quickly transmitted to the major sects of Thousand Demon Ridge. Upon hearing the news, it was not Lu Ye's rude request that the major sects were more concerned about, but his current condition. Based on the observations of Senior Brother Miao and his group, there was not a trace of purple lightning coiling around Ye's body. He was quite clearly in a normal state. This puzzled the countless experts of Thousand Demon Ridge. More than 50 New Moon Sect disciples died by Ye's hands, and the cultivators that escaped from the outpost personally saw Yi being surrounded by purple lightning, but how long had it been? How could the judgment of the heavens that struck fear even into the hearts of divine ocean realm cultivators have vanished out of nowhere? Only after Senior Brother Miao and the rest made the heavenly oath was this news seen as confirmed. The Thousand Demon Ridge couldn't help but be bewildered. They had hoped that Yi would not be able to endure the soul-destroying torment, and even if he didn't die, he would find it difficult to come out and stir up trouble. However, it seemed now that he had suppressed or even eliminated the judgment of the heavens, entwining his body by some unknown means. Thousand Demon Ridge was more inclined to believe the former possibility. After all, the existence of an ability that could eliminate the punishment of the heavens seemed hard to believe. They remembered that woman from the Crimson Blood sect called Mo Yuan. She had forcibly entered the Spirit Creek battlefield twice, killing a good number of Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators, and came out unscathed even after facing heaven's punishment. Did the Crimson Blood sect truly possess some special and incredible means that could suppress heaven's punishment? If that were the case, things would become troublesome. Facing the Annihilator of sects, they could neither fight him nor defend against him. Other than obediently cooperating with him and appeasing his anger, it seemed there were no other options. Most of the sects of Thousand Demon Ridge were discontented because the cultivators who had given Yi trouble in the Carnage Coliseum were not their own, yet they had to suffer such undeserved calamity. Yi clearly had no idea who had bothered him in the Carnage Coliseum either, so he simply decided to deal with all of them in one fell swoop. How could they be content with this? A few months ago they had already sent some peace money to Lu Yi, which was a sense of shame that Thousand Demon Ridge couldn't wash away. Now, a few months later, were they going to experience this humiliation again? What was the difference between that and rubbing salt into their wounds? Most importantly, Yi was from the Crimson Blood sect, and the Crimson Blood sect was under the Grand Sky Coalition. The peace offering sent by so many first, second, and third-tier sects, when combined, constituted a huge amount of resources, perfectly feeding their enemy. Such a large bounty would allow the Crimson Blood sect no need to worry about its acolytes' cultivation expenses for decades. It was said that the monthly salary of the Crimson Blood sect acolytes was comparable to that of the top first-tier sect in Jianghu. Even the treatment of some initiates was better than that of many major sections. A ninth-tier sect like them could only afford such generous treatment for its disciples by bleeding resources from the major sects of Thousand Demon Ridge. If it were to happen again, heavens knows how the Crimson Blood sect would develop in the future. Fortunately, Yi gave them 10 days to prepare, just like last time. So, there was still room for negotiation on Thousand Demon Ridge's side. Whether to compromise or not was a big question. Many divine ocean realm cultivators from different sects gathered together in order to discuss this matter. Soon someone raised a crucial question. Why didn't Yi kill senior brother Miao and his group? If his intention was just to deliver a message, leaving one person alive would be enough. What was more, he could even have personally delivered the message to any one of Thousand Demon Ridge's outposts. Senior brother Miao and the others were all unharmed, and Yi had never shown any intention to attack them from beginning to end, a thought-provoking result. Given the strength he showed at the New Moon Sect's outpost, senior brother Miao and his group should have had no reason to escape unscathed. Despite the fact that Lu Yi let them go claiming that he wasn't feeling the urge to kill them, his decision seemed to be full of contradictions upon further contemplation. Yi must have had some concerns that kept him from acting against senior brother Miao and his group. This discovery enlightened many of the divine ocean realm cultivators. Someone slowly spoke up. Currently we are speculating that the Crimson Blood sect might have some special means that can allow them to suppress the judgment of the heavens, but what if this method also comes with some drawbacks? What do you mean, Elder Qin? Someone asked. Elder Qin stroked his beard. This old man has lived for so many years, yet I have never heard of anyone being able to resist heaven's punishment. While the idea of suppressing the heaven's punishment sounds ridiculous, the fact is before us and I'm willing to believe it for now. However, heaven-defying methods must come with a great price. It's highly likely that Yi was not unwilling to kill, but unable to do so. As soon as these words were spoken, many divine ocean realm cultivators felt enlightened. Someone nodded. There is sense to Elder Chen's words. Perhaps if Yi were to kill again, the judgment of the heavens that is suppressed might erupt even more fiercely. If that's the case, does it mean he was just bluffing? Do you all remember when he broke through the defenses of nearly 30 sects in the core circle at Heaven 9? That was how he forced us to make concessions, but now, half a day has passed, and if he still had the ability to break through the defenses of a second outpost, why would he not try and exert pressure on us? Chapter 542 This thing can be overdrafted? Inside the hall, as one divine ocean realm expert after another gave their opinion, the situation seemed to become clearer. Regardless of what method Yi used to suppress heaven's punishment, it had to come at a great cost, and at this moment he probably couldn't kill again. If that was the case, what should the Thousand Demon Ridge have to fear him? He might have the ability to infiltrate others' outposts, but on the premise that he was restricted from killing, his threat to Thousand Demon Ridge was almost negligible. Of course, this was just a speculation, and they couldn't be sure until they had firm evidence in their hands. It's easy to verify it, someone spoke up. First we find out Yi's location, then we send a group of Heaven 9 cultivators to probe him together to see whether or not he can still kill. That sounds reasonable, let's proceed like that. Does anyone have any opinions? I agree. No objections. I have a suggestion. Let's try to find Heaven 9 cultivators in the role of supremacy. If they're too weak, they won't be able to verify anything. Furthermore, if possible, we may be able to seize the opportunity to eliminate him. Very well, let's settle it at that. My 100 Pass sect can send one person. The Seacliff Pavilion will send one person. My Flying Thunder cult will send one person. With the contributions of each divine ocean realm cultivator, they quickly formed a team of about 20 to 30 people, all of whom were from the role of supremacy, with no shortage of those who ranked in the top 20. Then please send word to the Spirit Creek battlefield and have them make their move as soon as possible, said an elderly divine ocean realm cultivator who had been silent in the chief's seat this whole while. After receiving their orders, they immediately began to spread the message. However, it was at that moment that some news seemed to come from the outside. Many divine ocean realm masters checked the messages one after another. After a short while, everyone's expressions became serious. Even the divine ocean realm elder who had spoken earlier furrowed his brow and raised his hand to say, "Let's put what we were discussing on hold for now." He looked around with his seemingly cloudy eyes and slowly spoke. We've received information that just a quarter of an incense stick of time ago, the outpost of the Clouded Sun clan was breached by Yi, and more than 10 people were killed. As soon as he spoke, the entire hall fell silent. They were just discussing how they were going to verify their previous speculation, but now it seemed there was no need to verify anything. Yi had already attacked the Clouded Sun clan's outpost, invalidating their previous conjecture. Where the gazes of many converged, a divine ocean realm expert, whose eyes seemed to be spewing fire, gritted his teeth and cursed, "That little bastard." This man was a divine ocean realm cultivator from the Clouded Sun sect, and coincidentally, he also happened to receive the information from his clan about what had happened in the Spirit Creek battlefield while he was here. Though in comparison the casualties sustained by their acolytes were much lower compared to the New Moon sect, it was mainly because they had learned from the New Moon sect's experience and quickly evacuated their men. Otherwise, with EE's proclivities, there would likely have been rivers of blood and mountains of corpses. "Who has a 10-point map of the Spirit Creek battlefield?" the elder presiding over the discussion asked. Never did he expect that a divine ocean realm expert like himself would still have to personally inquire about the matters in the Spirit Creek battlefield, but the Spirit Creek realm was the foundation of every sect, and this matter had reached a point where he needed to make personal inquiries. "I have one." At the emergence of that sentence, a 10-point map of the Spirit Creek battlefield was taken out, and the divine ocean realm expert poured his spiritual power into it while someone else raised their hand to construct a peculiar glyph. The glyph and the detailed map were connected, and in the next moment, a large image appeared before everyone's eyes. The image projected was that of the 10-point map of the Spirit Creek battlefield. The New Moon Sect's outpost is not that close to the Clouded Sun clan's outpost, but it's not far either. The presiding elder looked at the map and continued, "With EE's strength, he should be able to reach there in less than half a day, so the timing matches up. However, several other outposts of other sects between the two of them. Why did EE leave those outposts alone and specifically attack the Clouded Sun clan's outpost?" From EE's route of action, he seemed to be targeting the Clouded Sun clan's outpost specifically. "Brother Fu, is there any reason behind this?" The divine ocean realm expert from the Clouded Sun clan, the one surnamed Fu, had an unsightly expression on his face. "We received news earlier that an acolyte named Wei Kei from our clan participated in the siege against Yi in the Carnage Coliseum. That's most likely the reason why Yi came to our doorstep." At his words, the faces of many divine ocean realm cultivators also became unsightly. First, there was Tan Xing from the New Moon sect, and now Wei Kei from the Clouded Sun clan. Yi was acting with specific targets in mind. However, they weren't the only ones who participated in the siege against Yi. Many of them had acolytes under their wings that were involved as well. Did this mean that Yi would also come to their outposts? Some weren't able to determine this as they didn't know whether the acolytes of their sects were involved in what happened in the Carnage Coliseum or not. This was a risky situation. They quickly sent messages out, warning the acolytes in the Spirit Creek battlefield to be on alert, and to immediately retreat to Jianghu as soon as they discovered Yi's tracks. If the outpost was breached, there was no way the blessings of the Divine Opportunity column could be maintained, but the most important thing now was to ensure the safety of their own acolytes. "Brother Fu, did the heavens enact punishment on Yi after he killed those men?" The cultivator surnamed Fu responded, "I'll inquire about it." He sent a message back to his clan to ask about the situation, and it wasn't long before a response came back. Yes, purple lightning was coiling around his body as soon as he made a move against the first person. The nearly 100 divine ocean realm experts in the hall fell silent. They couldn't figure out what the situation was with Yi. They had initially speculated that he had a special method to suppress heaven's punishment, but the information they now received didn't seem to make sense. If he had the means of suppressing the punishment, then the purple lightning shouldn't have appeared around him, but if he didn't suppress it, how could Yi remain unscathed? After a while, the presiding elder spoke. "A few months ago, our Thousand Demon Ridge gave in to his demands. In just a few months, Yi has once again made such impertinent demands. We shouldn't encourage this kind of deviant behavior. Otherwise, he might come every few months, then should we be expected to compromise every single time?" Everyone fell silent. On careful thought, even though Yi was despicable in some ways, he could still be considered a reasonable person. He stopped troubling the sects of the Thousand Demon Ridge after receiving the peace offering from them last time, and it wasn't long before he advanced into the Cloud River realm and left the Spirit Creek battlefield. It wasn't that he acted without reason this time either. If it wasn't for the targeted attack he suffered in the Carnage Coliseum, he probably wouldn't have come to the Spirit Creek battlefield. Of course, even if they thought that way, they wouldn't say it out loud. "What do you think, Elder Qin?" someone asked. "Let's send some people into the Spirit Creek battlefield and negotiate with him. His actions seem to indicate that he's not just a reckless person. He should also be aware of the consequences if he acts too recklessly." After Elder Chen laid out his plan, the other divine ocean realm experts nodded in agreement. Since Yi had given them a 10-day deadline like last time, it would be better to talk to him first regardless of the outcome. It didn't seem like an optimistic move, but what if negotiations came out successful? Even if they couldn't reach an agreement, they still had 10 days to prepare. They couldn't just give him whatever he wanted, otherwise, what would happen to the pride of the 1,000 Demon Ridge cultivators when they went out in the future? Were they shameless? While the Divine Ocean Realm experts were talking in the Clouded Sun Clan's outpost, Lu Yi had immersed his mind into his consciousness and was examining the Tree of Glyphs. A large cloud of gray smoke rose from the tree, indicating that its fuel was still abundant. Mainly it was because he hadn't killed too many people this time. It wasn't that he didn't want to, he just didn't get to. As soon as the cultivators of the Clouded Sun Clan realized that Lu Yi had entered their outpost, they quickly began evacuating and all left in just a short period of time. This also made things easier for Lu Yi. The only thing that made him feel helpless were his contribution points. He had already spent all his contribution points earlier on Flames of Earthen Spirits to fuel the Tree of Glyphs. As a result, the contribution points section on his battlefield imprint showed that he owed a total of 435 contribution points. It was a first for Lu Yi to find out that contribution points could actually be owed. It was eye-opening. It seems the heavens would never make a losing deal, Lu Yi could only sigh. Fortunately, he still gained some spoils of war. After sorting through them, he tossed them all into the Vault of Providence. Only then did he pay off all the contribution points owed and even earn a little bit extra outside of that. Lu Yi didn't know what kind of consequences one might face for owing contribution points to the heavens, as no one had tried such a thing before. After all, who would owe contribution points in the first place? However, he had been plagued with a feeling of unease from the moment he began owing those contribution points, as if something bad might happen to him at any moment. Owing contribution points seemed like it could potentially affect his own luck and make things go awry. Even someone with such remarkable luck as he felt that way upon owing contribution points. So it was not difficult to imagine that consequences would befall an ordinary person if they faced the same situation. They might stumble while walking and even choke while drinking water. As the Tree of Glyphs continued to burn, the purple thunder lingering around Lu Ye's body gradually dissipated. Tao Jingyu emerged from the Sanctum of Providence with an excited expression. "Fifth senior brother, where are we going next?" Following his fifth senior brother around had given him a taste of greatness, and there weren't any risks to it at all. They could even plunder the blessings of others' outposts, including the outposts of Core Circle sections. After plundering 2 of them, he had reaped abundant gains. Though the plundered blessings had to be converted into contribution points at their own outpost, as the current legate in charge of the Crimson Blood Sects outpost, he could even do himself a little favor and distribute a monthly salary to himself. Without even mentioning anything else, there was no longer any need for him to worry about not having enough contribution points to buy heaven-grade cultivation disciplines in the future. This could also be considered his business trip expenses for following his 5th senior brother. He believed his 2nd senior sister should allow it. Looking back, none of the previous legates of the Crimson Blood Sect had ever had the opportunity to plunder blessings from multiple enemy outposts like him and his 5th senior brother. He was extremely proud to be initiated into the Crimson Blood Sect. In the past, he was just an independent cultivator, living a lonely and destitute life, unable to secure enough resources for his cultivation. However, after joining the Crimson Blood Sect, life became better day by day. Now, the monthly salary he received from the sect was comparable to the treatment of disciples from the first-tier sects. For this reason alone, he was the envy of 90% of the Spirit Creek Realm cultivators in Jianghu. Chapter 543: The Annihilator of Sects Hobby. The Crimson Blood Sect had formed alliances with numerous Inner Circle and Core Circle sections. Once their disciples reached a certain level of cultivation, they were free to choose where they wished to train. Recently, many of the Crimson Blood Sect's disciples had left the outpost and entered the Inner Circle. Some chose to take shelter with other sects' outposts, while others, like the Forerunner Qinyu, chose to venture into the Inner Circle alone. The choice was entirely up to the individual. No one was forced into anything. Disciples from their allied sects were also sent to the Crimson Blood Sect to cultivate, further strengthening the sect's power. A few days ago there was an insectoid attack, but instead of worrying, the Crimson Blood Sect simply saw them as a great source of contribution points, not stopping until they'd completely exhausted the energy of the nucleus of life in their nest. In the battlefield of the Outer Circle, The Crimson Blood Sects outpost undoubtedly stood as a mighty force. In a radius of 1,000 kilometers from the Crimson Blood Sects outpost, no Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators dared to tread recklessly. It was said that several nearby Thousand Demon Ridge forces were even planning to relocate their outposts. They had no choice. Life had become too difficult, and what else could they do but move? There aren't any targets left. Lu Yi stood up upon hearing Tao Jingyu's inquiry and stretched his back. He also wanted to move on to the next target, but it was best not to go overboard sometimes. No matter how one looked at it, he was bullying the weak this time, which was a little different from back when he was in Heaven 9. Of course, the main point was that he didn't know the origins of the Ninth Order Cloud River Realm cultivators who had attacked him in Carnage Coliseum. Otherwise he could just openly go after them. He only knew Tan Sheng and Wei Kei's origins because of Li Baxian and Xia Qianqian. There was also a blade wielder that others referred to as Xiao Liang. He seemed to come from the Raving Bladesmen. The blade technique insights that he needed seemed to have shown themselves. Oh, Tao Jingyu hummed a response without protest. Though somewhat disappointed, he didn't push the matter. The gains from this trip were already abundant. Take junior brother Tao back to the outpost and be careful on the way, Lu Yi instructed. Understood. You take care too, responded as she summoned her flight-type artifact. She had her own flight-type artifact, but following Lu Yi all the time, she never had the opportunity to use it. After a while, rose to the skies with Tao Jingyu and flew in the direction of the Crimson Blood Sects outpost. She and Amber could both exert strength at the level of Heaven 9, so they hardly encountered any danger in this Spirit Creek battlefield, especially now that all the major Thousand Demon Ridge sects were on high alert, wary of Lu Ye's arrival. None of the powerful cultivators would be wandering around. But with their strength, even if they bumped into a couple of Heaven 9 cultivators, they would still be able to handle them. That was why Lu Yi wasn't concerned about Yi and Amber's safety at all. After checking his 10-point map, Lu Yi also quickly summoned his own flight-type artifact and stepped onto it, flying leisurely in one direction. He was heading to Skysword Peak to wait for the offerings sent over by Thousand Demon Ridge. After all that busy work, it was time to reap the rewards. The agreed-upon time was 10 days, so there was no need to hurry. He wandered around leisurely, feeling quite carefree. While he was enjoying himself, many Thousand Demon Ridge cultivators were in the midst of suffering. Almost every one of Thousand Demon Ridge's outposts had received warnings from their sect to stay on guard against Yi. If they were to find his tracks, they were to immediately withdraw back to Jiuzhou. This caused almost all the cultivators in the Thousand Demon Ridge's core circle outposts to be on high alert, for fear that the Annihilator of Sects would suddenly attack. And there was no need to mention just how on edge the sects that were close to the Clouded Sun clan's outpost were. But despite waiting and waiting, no one saw any sign of the Annihilator of Sects. After destroying the outpost of the Clouded Sun clan, he disappeared without a trace. 2 days later, Lu Yi arrived at Skysword Peak. He had been here once several months ago to wait for the Thousand Demon Ridge's peace offering, and he thought he would never come here again after leaving the Spirit Creek battlefield, but he didn't expect to come back again and do the same thing as he did several months ago. Life truly was unpredictable. After landing on the Spirit Peak, Lu Yi found a flat rock and sat cross-legged on it, his inviolable saber right beside him. Looking at the sea of clouds rolling in front of him, Lu Yi suddenly regretted giving such a long deadline to the Thousand Demon Ridge. It was impossible for him to cultivate in the Spirit Creek battlefield since his cultivation had already exceeded the level of the Spirit Creek realm. So, even if he took in the spiritual energy from this heaven and earth or consumed spirit pills, neither had any effect. But there was nothing he could do about that. He could only take out the books he had gotten from Lady Yun and study them. He had already gone through these books more than once, but each time he reviewed them, he would gain something new. He also learned some interesting glyphs from the books, but as they were not on the tree of glyphs, constructing them would require extensive practice, all the while carrying a risk of failure. Up till now, the most useful glyph he had learned from these books was glyph Void. Without glyph Void, he wouldn't have been able to survive multiple near-death experiences in the Carnage Coliseum, nor could he have persisted for so long under the pursuit of so many powerful cultivators. This was a very promising glyph, and Lu Yi had always thought that there must be a similar glyph on the Tree of Glyphs. However, he had not been able to unlock it and didn't know which leaf it was on. If he could unlock that glyph on the Tree of Glyphs, it would make setting up teleportation wards much easier in the future. With one fixed-point teleportation ward, he could return to it at any time through the use of glyph void as long as he was within range of it, and he wouldn't have to worry about setting up multiple wards. The glyph itself had the effect of teleportation, and the purpose of using it as the core of the ward was to make the glyph more robust and stable. Without the framework of a ward and no one to maintain it, glyphs were easily destroyed. He could even construct the glyph on his own spirit artifact to develop new means of killing enemies. Of course, these were all just ideas that he pondered during his leisure time. To accomplish such a thing, he would need to get the right leaf burning on the tree of glyphs. While he was studying on Skysword Peak, two figures flew out on their flight-type artifacts from the outpost of a core circle sect. They were one man and one woman. The man appeared to be in his 30s or 40s, with a majestic appearance and a tall and imposing figure, clearly someone in a high position. The woman had a beautiful appearance, and it was simply impossible to tell her exact age from looks alone. She could be 16 to 17, or 24 to 25. She had a tall figure, but what was rare was her supple figure. Both of them were experts in the Ninth Order Real Lake realm. Never in their lives had they imagined that they would still have the opportunity to enter the Spirit Creek battlefield, let alone with the mission of negotiating with a brat on the Cloud River realm. The matter had been discussed by the Divine Ocean realm experts, and in the end, the two of them were chosen to come. The main reason was because this matter was neither big nor small, so it was not appropriate for the Divine Ocean realm experts to come in person. If the negotiations failed and the situation became awkward, then it would be difficult to wrap up the situation once a fight broke out. Of course, the most important reason was Lu Ye's domineering strength. These Divine Ocean realm experts really did not have the confidence to defeat him. It would be fine if they won the fight, but what if they lost? They were all Divine Ocean realm cultivators, so how could they explain it to the world when they were pressed on the ground by a kid who was barely 18 and taught a lesson by him? So, after much discussion, they decided that it was more appropriate for a cultivator in the Real Lake realm to handle the negotiations. Firstly, it showed their sincerity, and the Real Lake realm cultivators were also confident in being able to keep the negotiation under control. Originally, two male candidates were chosen, but just as they were concluding the matter, one Divine Ocean realm expert spoke up and replaced one of them with the woman instead. The flower basket-like flight-type artifact flying in the sky looked beautiful, complementing the woman's stunning beauty and curvaceous figure, enough to attract the gaze of almost all the men in the world. Yun Qingyue stood on the flower basket, looking up at the rolling clouds in the sky, feeling a little annoyed inside. It wasn't just because of the occasional glances she felt from behind, but also the instructions given by that Divine Ocean Realm Senior before their departure. She didn't know where that Divine Ocean Realm Senior had obtained the information, but it was said that the Annihilator of Sects had no preferences other than women who were big and round, and that was why she was chosen to replace the original negotiation candidate, all in hopes that she could perform well. On one hand, her figure suited the Annihilator of Sects' taste, and on the other hand, her appearance made it difficult to gauge her age, making it easy for people to mistake her for a young girl in her teens, which could lower Ye's guard. It was not abnormal for a hot-blooded young man, only 17 or 18, to have a fondness for beautiful women. With so many female cultivators in Thousand Demon Ridge, why did they choose her specifically? But the Divine Ocean Realm expert had spoken, and she had no room to refuse. She had no other choice but to grit her teeth and go, only hoping she would not suffer too much humiliation. The strength of a Spirit Creek realm cultivator at the elite level was not something she could contend with. As for the rumor that the Annihilator of Sects liked women who were big and round, she heard that it had supposedly been verified. When he challenged the role of supremacy, he had killed practically all the opponents he faced regardless of gender, save for a single woman called Bailan who was big and round. Even female cultivators were killed, showing that Yi was not soft-hearted towards the fairer sex. But inexplicably he spared Bailan, which naturally made people ponder. Junior Sister Yun, there's no need to be so anxious. That brat gave a 10-day deadline and it's only been 2 days. With our speed, we'll be able to reach Skysword Peak in a day, said Wu Jun, who followed behind Yun Qingyue. They weren't of the same sect, but they had interacted during their youth. Speaking of which, he had once been infatuated with this junior sister Yun. After all, Yun Qingyue was a heavenly beauty that drove all the young people in all of the Thousand Demon Ridge crazy during their generation. It was rare for someone to see her appearance and not be moved. Unfortunately, he was a nobody then and only had the qualification to admire her from afar. Now, he was also a cultivator in the Ninth Order Real Lake realm with a chance of breaking through into the Divine Ocean realm in the future. He was no longer the young and humble youth of the past and had gained some composure. Though he still found this heavenly beauty pleasing to the eye, he wouldn't have other thoughts about her. Still, it was rare to be able to go on a mission with the dream goddess of his youth, and he did find it enjoyable to some extent, so he wasn't in a hurry to rush over. In fact, he even hoped to take the journey slow. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.